community accounted for a staggering 54.9% of all religious bias crime. Nearly 55%. That is a staggering number and unacceptable. These reported anti-Semitic incidents occurred at Jewish institutions such as synagogues, Jewish community centers, and Jewish schools. The reported incidents included harassment, vandalism, and assault. While the continued prevalence of these attacks can sometimes seem overwhelming, as Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker showed us, the proper use of security training and resources can absolutely help save lives. One of the most important resources available to houses of worship is FEMA's nonprofit security grant program. And this competitive grant program provides funding to support the target hardening and other security related activities to nonprofit organizations that are at high risk for a terrorist attack. Specifically, the program seeks to integrate the preparedness activities of nonprofit organizations with the broader state, local, tribal, and territorial preparedness efforts. The vital nature of this program is highlighted by the fact that in fiscal year 21, more than 3,300 nonprofit organizations submitted applications to this program. Almost 40% of the nonprofits that applied had never received this funding. However, due to the widespread demand for this program, less than half of the nonprofits that applied ended up receiving funding. As the lead Republican on the House Homeland Security Committee Subcommittee for Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Recovery, I remain committed, along with Chairwoman Demings, to strengthen our nation's overall emergency preparedness by supporting programs like the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. I also remain committed to working in a bipartisan manner to stop and combat anti-Semitism and violence across all religious groups. Freedom of religion is a cornerstone of our Constitution, and any violation of this freedom should not be tolerated. For this reason, I co-sponsored a bipartisan resolution condemning the recent anti-Semitic terrorist act on the congregation Beth Israel Synagogue. In closing, I am incredibly proud to represent Florida's 3rd Congressional District, which has an incredible, vibrant faith community. In fact, my district includes the University of Florida, the Gator Nation, which is home to the largest Jewish student organization in the country, Gators for Israel. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on the importance of the nonprofit security grant program and the ways in which they have used this grant program to protect their faith communities and any recommendations that they have to improve this program moving forward. And with that, thank you, Chairwoman Demings, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member for her opening statement. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Counterterrorism, the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a warm welcome to all of our witnesses. Since I became the chair of the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Counterterrorism last year, about a year ago, we focused on how the threat to our communities has evolved over the last several years, from international terrorism to homegrown and domestic violent extremism. More and more, we're finding that these extremist ideologies don't exist in isolation. The lines between hate and terror and conspiracy are increasingly blurring together. The latest reminder of this truth and the catalyst for this hearing is what happened and what we saw in Colleyville, Texas last month. Ordinary Americans came face to face with what happens when anti-Semitic ideology, terrorist ideology, is mixed with historic conspiracy theories about Jewish influence. This evolving threat is one that the Department of Homeland Security actually just highlighted yesterday in their latest National Terrorism Bulletin. And as the ADL's Jonathan Greenblatt told our committee last week, quote, anti-Semitism is at the beating heart of this extremist ideology. And therefore, Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to place in the record the National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin that was issued yesterday by DHS.
Without objection.
So let's just be clear about Colleyville, excuse me. This was not an isolated incident. The last 5 years has seen a 60% increase in anti-Semitic incidents nationwide, with 2020 marking the 3rd highest amount since ADL began tracking these incidents in the 1970s. We felt this particularly acutely in the state of Michigan, where I'm from, where we saw a 21% increase from graffitied swastikas on buildings to Zoom bombings. In the weeks after Colleyville, it's become clear that this tragedy, like so many before it, has become a rallying point for hate and extremism of all kinds. Al-Qaeda supporters, white supremacists, Holocaust deniers, QAnon conspiracy theorists, Islamophobes, all have seized onto this particular tragedy for their own twisted ends. So this growing threat can be demoralizing, but as our witnesses today will note, we are far from powerless against it. Today, we have the rare ability, particularly for this committee, the rare ability to not only discuss the tools we know are effective in protecting against violent hate, but to hear from someone who can speak to its value better than anyone. I'm truly honored that we're able to have Rabbi Cytron-Walker with us today. Simply put, the Rabbi Charlie's actions last month literally saved lives. And as he said, they were made possible by the training and support he received before the incident, including the nonprofit security grant program. We've seen the value of these programs across Michigan. I will just say, when one of the largest mosques in our state, which is in my district, IAGD, faced a flurry of anti-Islamic harassment and vandalism just after the Christchurch attacks in New Zealand, we brought them together with leaders from the Jewish community, including the rabbi who married me, and worked together to secure this funding to protect their house of worship. Since 2019, this program has provided nearly $7 million to secure over 70 synagogues, mosques, churches, schools, and community centers across Michigan. Over 500,000 of that was to my district, and that includes churches in Brighton and Okemos, a parish in Pinckney, Michigan State's Hillel program in East Lansing, and again, the Islamic Association in Rochester Hills. But we know that there's more that we can do, both in closing the $200 million funding shortfall we've seen since last year. We've also been advocating with over 170 of our colleagues in bipartisan basis to make this an easier program to access, particularly for smaller communities, which is something the rabbi and I spoke about. Today's hearing is focused on some of the most pressing policy issues and threats before our committee, but for me, it's also deeply personal. As it happens, Rabbi Charlie is a native Michigander. He's from the Lansing area, which I represent. His mom still lives there. Actually went to summer camp with my brother. But as we know, other of our witnesses are wonderful representatives, and I want to recognize their work on these issues for the long term. And then lastly, I want to recognize the perverseness of having to secure our houses of worship the way my colleagues and I had to harden our facilities when I served in places like Iraq. But while we work to prevent these tragedies from occurring, it's also our responsibility to ensure that these same cherished institutions and sacred places are not the most vulnerable. We have seen the contradiction between the spirit of charity and welcoming people into places like the synagogue in Colleyville, and then the threats that our faith communities are facing. But that openness, which moves a congregation to open up their sanctuary to a stranger in need, that is a strength in our community, and we need to do everything we can to secure it. So looking forward to discussing how we can continue to protect these houses of worship. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairwoman Slotkin. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Counterterrorism, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings, Chairwoman Slotkin, Ranking Member Kamek. It's very important today, and I really appreciate the effort that we're going through here to hold this important joint subcommittee hearing, and to thank our witnesses for your time and for joining a discussion on an issue that threatens the safety and the security of Americans across the country, and unfortunately is pervasive throughout the world. You know, the Jewish community is targeted more often than any other religious group in the United States. And since the FBI began collecting crime data in the 1990s, the number of hate crimes against the Jewish community have ranged from 600 to 1,200 incidents each year. And quite frankly, that data being voluntary could probably also be very underrepresentative of the true facts. And in 2020, the most recent year that the FBI has published data, Jewish Americans were the target of nearly 60% of all religiously motivated hate crimes, despite accounting for less than 2% of the total U.S. population. It's imperative that we get a better understanding of the threat that Jewish Americans face every day and how federal and local law enforcement can better work together to protect not just this demographic, but also against any sort of hate crime, because it's completely unacceptable. I'm especially grateful to have Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker here today as a witness. First off, sir, you are a hero, and we are grateful for the bravery and the courage that you showed in a very trying time. And barely a month ago, British citizen Malik Faisal Akram took the rabbi and 3 other members of Congregation Beth Israel hostage on a Saturday in Colleyville, Texas. And Akram's goal was allegedly to secure the release of Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani terrorist who was serving an 86-year term in a Fort Worth prison for the attempted murder of U.S. officers in Afghanistan. But in the face of danger, Rabbi Cytron-Walker waited for an opportune moment and acted. And we are absolutely grateful, Rabbi, for your quick thinking, your heroic actions, your courage, and really the fact that you were prepared. And it is unfortunate, and I agree with Chairwoman Slotkin, that it's unfortunate that we have to be thinking like that. But I very much appreciate your courage that we didn't have an incident that could have been worse. And we owe it to all the houses of worship across America, and especially to our synagogues, to bolster safety and security from any sort of religiously motivated hate crime or threat of terrorism. And at the federal level, we must make improvements to our information sharing agreements with our visa waiver program, partner countries, to ensure that others like Akram with violent criminal histories are known to DHS and to the agency partners before they are allowed to enter the United States, to move freely and threaten any American citizen. And we must also ensure that communication and information sharing between the federal and local law enforcement levels continues to be strong, that it continues to move between these agencies to detect threats so that we can prevent situations like Colleyville from happening. And what brings us here today, we must continue our support of faith-based communities through the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. I'm very interested to hear from our witnesses today as to how they are working to protect Jewish synagogues, schools, and recreational facilities. I'd like to learn more about the threat that we face, that they face, and the partnerships that we see, the reporting capabilities, and how the information sharing is really working. And I'm interested in those details so that we can protect our houses of worship, so that we can continue to have that freedom that our framers and that our Constitution allows, and that really, quite frankly, makes this country the greatest country in the world. Protecting our houses of worship, it's essential to our safety and our security, but it's essential to being an American. And an attack on the Jewish members of our community is an attack on the very pillars of the religious freedoms that our country was founded upon. So in closing, I'd like to thank our witnesses, and I'd like to thank Chairwoman Demings, Chairwoman Slotkin, and Ranking Member Kamek for holding this very important meeting, and I yield back.
The chairwoman thanks the ranking member. It is now my honor to recognize the chair of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings, Chairwoman Slotkin, Ranking Member Kamek, and Ranking Member Pfluger for holding this timely hearing. In early 2020, in the wake of anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish communities in New York and New Jersey, including a deadly invasion of a rabbi's home during Hanukkah, the committee held a series of hearings on the topic. At the time, we received testimony from a diverse group of Jewish leaders about what the federal government should do to respond to the rise of anti-Semitic terrorism and violence. They issued an urgent call for the increased funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which Congress answered. Funding was doubled to $180 million. Earlier this Congress, the House passed the Build Back Better Act, which would add $100 million to the program. Last week, we received compelling testimony from Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, about how the Jewish community is a primary target for violent extremists from across the ideological spectrum. Certainly, last month's attack on Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, illustrates that fact, as the perpetrator was cheered by both violent white supremacists and Islamist terrorists. Today, we're fortunate to have a hero in our midst. Rabbi Cytron-Walker, thank you for joining us and being so willing to share your story. I understand you relied on knowledge gained from security training to bring the incident being to a peaceful conclusion, and your steadiness and courage were undoubtedly important factors. On the subject of Colleyville attack, I note that the committee is conducting aggressive oversight into this incident and met just last week with the FBI and other officials. While the attack appears to have been motivated by the desire to force the release of an Islamist terrorist, the approach he took was predicated on the belief in historic and dangerous anti-Semitic tropes about so-called Jewish power. Such tropes are a prominent feature of a number of conspiracies espoused by QAnon and others and put real people in danger. It falls to all of us to speak out loudly against them. As someone with a long history with the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, I'm pleased that we are holding this hearing today to get testimony on the record about the importance of the program and why its funding should be significantly increased. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members are reminded that the committees will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. Without objection, members not on the subcommittee shall be permitted to sit and question the witnesses. I now welcome again our panel of witnesses, and I will recognize the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin, to introduce our first witness.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. It is my honor to introduce Rabbi Cytron-Walker to our committee. Over the past month, Americans have come to know him for his heroic actions last month, which undoubtedly saved lives. But Rabbi Charlie has been the rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville in Texas since 2006. He graduated from the University of Michigan, which we won't hold against him, in 1998. And he received his rabbinical ordination from Hebrew Union College in 2006. Along the way, he worked with the homeless population in Ann Arbor and civil rights organization in Detroit, and has been recognized for his leadership on a whole range of issues, all emblematic of the warm spirit which he brings to his ministry. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're proud to call him a proud Michigander and native of Lansing, Michigan, which I represent. On the day of the attack, I found myself talking to his sister and through the family rabbi to his mother as the events unfolded, just making sure to pass along the great information or the important information that I was getting from the Department of Homeland Security. We ended up becoming quickly connected, as did the entirety of the Detroit Jewish community on that day. And no family should ever have to go through what that family went through watching the rabbi. After speaking with Rabbi Charlie in the days since, I've been really moved by his courage, of course, but also his exceptional presence of mind during those incidents, which I know from serving 3 tours in Iraq, when your adrenaline is going and you are under threat, it is very hard to have presence of mind. And frankly, his perspective on events in using this awful experience to advocate for the protection of other communities in need. When we spoke on the phone, we spoke about post-traumatic stress, about leadership and how important leadership is in these moments, and about these moments in our lives that really give us purpose and give us mission. So Rabbi Charlie, it's our privilege to have you with us here today, to give you the opportunity to share your story with Congress, with the world. We feel really proud to host you at this event, and I'm very glad for the opportunity as a fellow Jewish Michigander to welcome you to the committee.
Our second witness is Rabbi Yosef Konoval. He is the rabbi of Shabbat South Orlando. In 1999, Rabbi Colleyville and his wife founded the Shabbat Center in South Orlando, which includes a Hebrew school, preschool, a popular summer camp, and several other educational programs and activities. In 2009, he also founded a private Jewish elementary school. Again, welcome, Rabbi. Our third witness is the Honorable Eric D. Fingerhut. Congressman Fingerhut is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America. Congressman Fingerhut has had a distinguished career in public service, including representing Ohio's 19th congressional district from 1993 to 1995. Welcome back to the House of Representatives, Congressman Fingerhut. Our fourth and final witness is Michael Masters. Mr. Masters is the National Director and CEO at the Secure Community Network. Previously, Mr. Masters served as Senior Vice President of the Chiffon Group and as the Executive Director of the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for Cook County, Illinois, where he coordinated the Homeland Security and Emergency Management System. We are so looking forward to hearing from our witnesses today. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask that each witness will summarize their statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker.
Chairwoman Demings, Chairwoman Slotkin, Ranking Member Kamek, Ranking Member Pfluger, Chairman Thompson, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you this morning. This is the first time I have appeared before a congressional committee, and it's great to see that there are so many fellow Texans and Michiganders on the subcommittees. I would like to take a moment before turning to the substance of my remarks to publicly thank Chairwoman Slotkin for her kind introduction and even more for her thoughtful outreach to my family during and after that traumatic day. I know it was a source of great comfort. I believe and often teach that Judaism is filled with contradictions because life is filled with contradictions. Today, I'm filled with mixed and even contradictory emotions. On the one hand, I am truly horrified that in our society today, religious leaders must devote themselves to security training. How to harden our facilities is both a necessary conversation and anathema to religious ideals of hospitality and loving the stranger. At the same time, I'm filled with gratitude. I'm grateful to be here. To be honest, I'm grateful to be anywhere. I'm so grateful that 6 years ago, almost to the day, I attended the Faith-Based Security Summit that was hosted by the FBI, Homeland Security, and our region's U.S. Attorney's Office. It was my first education related to active shooters, and the first time I was introduced to the concept of the Security Committee. Since then, I've participated in about a half dozen different security workshops offered by the FBI, the ADL, Colleyville Police, and the Secure Communities Network. Those sessions helped me to stay alert, look for an opportunity, and gave me the courage to act when I needed to. I am so grateful that just a few months after the Security Summit, our congregation formed our first security subcommittee. Their work was responsible for numerous physical security enhancements, educational sessions, and the development of our security action plan. They built a strong relationship between the Colleyville PD and Congregation Beth Israel. The police officers who were at CBI that day knew our building and knew us. All of their work made a dramatic difference. I am so grateful for the financial support of our members, Tarrant County's Jewish Federation, and the nonprofit security grant program that made our security plans possible. That included upgrading our security cameras, which was critical to law enforcement. Matthew DeSarno, special agent in charge of the FBI's Dallas field office, has said that the video coverage gave the decision makers, the negotiators, and others general situational and awareness. As grateful as I am for the support and funding under the Nonprofit Security Grant Act, my understanding is that the funding is not at a level where it can meet the urgent needs of the communities it was created to protect. Every congregation needs to be prepared. Yet the gap between the need and funding is profound. In 2021, fewer than half the nonprofit security grant program applications were approved. Further complicating the situation, it's also my understanding that if an institution does not receive much needed security grant, there's no indication of where their application fell short. Without feedback, it's impossible to improve the application for the future. That's disheartening at a time when religious institutions need reassurance and support. Perhaps FEMA or the appropriate agency could be required to provide some type of response to a grant application. I know that would impose an additional burden, which would need to be alleviated by additional funding. And in small congregations, we face special challenges in dealing with government grants. We have 2 paid staff, a part-time administrative assistant, and myself. Almost all the work of running our congregation is done by our members as volunteers. Perhaps just as the IRS provides short forms for small organizations, FEMA and other agencies could do the same here or find another way to lower the barriers for smaller congregations. On the morning of January 15th, when the gunman arrived, it was me and 1 volunteer in the building. I was running late. I was finishing my preparations for the Torah reading, organizing the online setup, checking sound, and in the midst of trying to do a million different things, I had a stranger come to the door. I have, of course, thought about that moment a great deal. I welcomed a terrorist into my congregation. I live with that responsibility. And it's important for you to understand that this was not a matter of me opening the door just because I value hospitality. I do value hospitality. The Torah scroll that we read from each week was gifted to our congregation thanks to hospitality. I strive to live that value every day. Like so many congregations of all backgrounds, CBI strives to be a house of prayer for all people. At the same time, I also value security. In a small congregation, I'm rabbi, in tech support, and gatekeeper. When our member asked if I knew the person at the door, I was distracted, but I still did a visual inspection, and after a brief word, he appeared to be who he said he was, a guy who spent a night outside in sub-40-degree weather. But that was just the first analysis, yes. I served him tea. I also spoke with him throughout the process to learn his story. Who was he? How did he get to CBI? Such conversation is welcoming, and it gave me an opportunity to see if he was acting nervous or if his story added up. Security and hospitality can go hand in hand. I was running late, but I spent time to see if there were any red flags, and I didn't see any. Of course, I was wrong. I share this because despite all the plans and funding and courses, I still opened the door. But because of all the plans and funding and courses, and literally dozens of small things that just happened to go our way, we were able to escape. And right now, there are far too many houses of worship that are just beginning the process we started 6 years ago. Right now, there are far too many houses of worship that have developed plans and are counting on the nonprofit security grant program to put them in place and help them feel more secure in their spiritual home. Right now, there are far too many houses of worship that won't get the support they need, especially small congregations. Tragically, we live in a world where all houses of worship need protection. All of us need protection. And I believe that both Democrats and Republicans desperately want to change that reality. Changing our reality all at once is too much. That's why Rabbi Tarfon reminds us in Pirkei Avot that we aren't obligated to complete the work, but we cannot neglect it. I'm not asking to fix everything, but increasing funding for and making appropriate adjustments to the nonprofit security grant program, the kinds of recommendations that Mr. Fingerhut will be testifying to just a little bit later on. That would be an incredibly positive step in the right direction. It is an honor for me to speak with you today. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rabbi Cytron-Walker, for your testimony. I now recognize Rabbi Colleyville to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to participate in today's hearing. And thanks also to our own very dear House Representative Chair Val Demings for inviting me and for all she does for our district and for our great country. My name is Rabbi Yosef Kanakov. I'm the senior rabbi at the Chabad Center for Jewish Life, serving the South Orlando community. 22 years ago, I arrived here to further the mission of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, who was actually honored by this Congress with his highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal in 1994. That mission, in which I engaged together with thousands of colleagues across all 50 states, is to share the Torah's message of love for others, unity, kindness, charity, and faith. And today at our center, people of all ages, from all backgrounds and walks of life, come to find strength, meaning, and encouragement to study, be inspired, and derive a true sense of community. We are well known for our non-judgmental approach and accessibility. This has been very exciting for me, especially since my own grandfather, also a rabbi, tried to do the same in Soviet Russia years ago, but was restricted, even persecuted, for his mere practice of faith. As anti-Semitism and communism didn't allow him to practice his religion openly, he fled to these shores and thankfully found a wonderful country, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we can live in peace and practice our religion freely and with pride without fear or danger. But sadly, new realities are echoing the dangers of the last generation, albeit this time not from the government, but radicals and prejudiced, misguided citizens. And these realities are causing many members of our community, and I know many others as well, to suddenly feel uncomfortable and even afraid to visit our center and synagogue and enjoy its many offerings. And well beyond our own centers, I know people in today's climate actually hesitate to openly observe our religion, to study with us, or just to come by to get inspired. Suddenly, we've become occupied with trying to calm people from their immediate fears of physical threats. Each new attack on a place of worship only exacerbates their fears. When I decided to be a rabbi, I never envisioned that contending with physical threats would be a part of my spiritual mission in the USA. Take, for example, as we just heard from Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker, the recent attack on Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. The first reaction I heard from my community members was, "I'm so worried about them, my heart goes out to them." But the next thing I typically heard was, "Rabbi, that could have been us." Indeed, there has been a disproportionate amount of incidents at facilities led and operated by my colleagues across the US. And sadly, these events keep people away from synagogue. They make people hesitate before bringing their kids to a place that is, in truth, the healthiest place for a child. This is so unfortunate. Too often, people call me and say, "Rabbi, I just want to check if the guard is there today. Otherwise, I don't think I'm going to come." As for us in Orlando, we not only read about anti-Semitism and hate, we at Chabad of South Orlando are regrettably on the front lines of these incidents, with too often hate crimes, bomb threats, and more. For example, just 2 weeks ago, in Orlando, neo-Nazis displayed flags, Nazi paraphernalia, attacked a motorist, used pepper spray on people, and caused general security alerts. Just a few months ago, this same group stationed themselves in front of our own Chabad Center for 3 hours, demonstrating with swastikas, other anti-Semitic signs, and hateful speech, yelling and cursing, including making threats on their loudspeakers, all with the sinister intention to intimidate and frighten everyone entering and exiting our Chabad Center, including many small innocent children. Thankfully, the law enforcement arrived. We would have wished they would send them away, but at least they were present and prevented any harm coming to our community members. We have here on the screen, and I am holding as well, a flyer that was distributed throughout the Central Florida area related to COVID, how the Jews are to blame for the COVID agenda. And it is these types of things that really frighten people in the community, especially when people are already hesitating coming back to the center or synagogue due to COVID. And when they see these conspiracies being shared, it only exacerbates their fears. ADL's most recent audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States recorded more than 2,100 acts of assault, vandalism, and harassment, an increase of 12% over the previous year. Our center has been victim to other horrible real online threats, including a series of phone threats, which have been swiftly and efficiently dealt with thanks to the sterling work of the FBI. Just this week, as we were trying to give out free food to families with children, a woman who was volunteering on the car pickup drive-through turned to me and said, "Rabbi, I don't think this is safe. Anyone could drive through here and cause harm." Trying to reassure her, I responded, "You might be taking this too far. Someone can also do harm on your way home." And she responded, "I'm not afraid at home. I'm afraid here." The United States must help its citizens be protected so they can practice their religion freely. Indeed, this is a cornerstone of the founding of this great nation. As highly visible Jewish sites with the largest infrastructure of synagogues and educational and social centers across the U.S., over 2,500 centers in all 50 states, more than 200 in the state of Florida alone, the Chabad movement represents and is regularly responsible for the spiritual welfare of millions, men, women, and children at our sites and programs which impact and enhance communities and cities across our nation. We need better security to help us, our congregants, and the wider community, as well as other communities around the country, deter, detect, delay, and even defend ourselves from those who wish to cause us harm. The NSGP program is an amazing program, but it's a very competitive one, and fewer than half of applicant sites were awarded nationally last year in the fiscal year of 2021. We did receive the grant in 2020, but then COVID hit and red tape has caused delays. Despite the award, we have not been able to implement the grant yet, sadly. And I agree with many of the statements that Rabbi Cytron-Walker mentioned about ways to cut down the time in order to implement the grant, and ways to perhaps advance monies to allow the process to begin. Although it's mentioned in the program, perhaps something could be done immediately in order to protect these sites. And it can hardly be overemphasized how time is of the essence in this matter and addressing it properly and effectively. I also feel that perhaps we need more funds in order to allow for everyone that needs to be protected. Perhaps 500 million should be appropriated to protect these sites and ensure security for the homeland. I appreciate that our representatives in Washington, American Friends of Lubavitch, Chabad, maintain close contact with officials at the Department of Homeland Security, SCN, Conference of Presidents, and other relevant contributors to a strong support for development and implementation of these programs. And we across the nation need the strength now more than ever. I close by quoting the Rabbi again, who guided world Jewry and the post-Holocaust generation through continued threats of anti-Semitism worldwide and fear of annihilation of Jews in Israel, and always declared that Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people, will survive and grow ever stronger, and our trust in God is to remain steadfast. Standing with the anticipation for a brighter era of world peace, the biblical promised time of redemption and tranquility, he said, "We must stand proud and strong and continue to be the shining light and moral compass for the world around us." And he repeatedly implored the government of the United States, built on the principles of faith, trust in God, and justice, to stand by our side and the side of all citizens to secure our rights to live in peace and without any fear of those who wish our demise. I stand here today as a representative of every Jew and shoulder to shoulder with every peace-loving citizen of this great nation to urge our leaders, our government, and its agencies to significantly increase its efforts and do everything in its power to secure our safety and our freedom so that we may continue to be a light to the nations in tranquility and in peace. We hope to live in peace, as written in the Bible, Kings 1, a passage quoted by our founding president, George Washington, to the early Jewish community in the United States. Each shall live under his vine and fig tree, and no man shall be afraid. I eagerly await the fulfillment of the prophecy, when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and the world will know war no more, a time when there'll be no hatred nor jealousy, and the world will be filled with the knowledge of God speedily in our days. Thank you for your time and for allowing me to share my thoughts and suggestions.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Konnikov, for your testimony. And without objection, the flyer that you presented will be entered into the record. I now recognize Congressman Fingerhut to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chair Demings, Ranking Member Kemick, Chair Slotkin, Ranking Member Pfluger, members of the esteemed subcommittees, full chair, Chairman Thompson, and all the distinguished members, it is indeed a privilege to be back in the United States House of Representatives, and thank you for convening this morning's hearings. As Chair Demings mentioned, I am a former member of Congress. I also served 10 years in the Ohio Senate. I also had the privilege of serving as Chancellor of Ohio's public university system, and I mention that because I had the responsibility of chairing a statewide task force on campus security after the shootings at Virginia Tech in 2007. And I now serve as President and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, which is the umbrella organization for 146 Jewish federations and over 300 smaller networked Jewish communities. I know that the distinguished members of this committee are familiar with the work of Jewish federations and with our volunteer and professional leadership in your respective communities. We thank you for the many ways in which you have supported and enhanced our mission across the full spectrum of communal life. Now, security has always been a core concern of our Jewish federations. The ability and confidence of our community to participate fully in Jewish religious and cultural life depends on feeling safe, as both Rabbi Cytron-Walker and Rabbi Konikov have both beautifully stated. Now, it's important for me to say that no nation in history has a better record of safety and inclusion for its Jewish community than the United States of America, a fact that we in the Jewish communal leadership never forget, not for a single moment. But nevertheless, we Americans are not immune to the viruses of hate that are dramatically on the rise at this very moment at home and abroad. Committee members in your statements spoke of the increased violent attacks on faith-based institutions. But my dear colleagues, these are not statistics. Let me name some of them. The 2006 deadly attack at the Jewish Federation of Greater Seattle, the 2009 deadly attack on the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the 2012 deadly attack on the Sikh Temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, the 2004 deadly attack on the Jewish Community Center in Overland Park, Kansas, the 2015 deadly attack on the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, the 2018 deadly attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the 2019 deadly attack on the Chabad Synagogue in Poway, California. Since the attacks of the Tree of Life Synagogue building in 2018, September, we have experienced the most intense period of violent attacks on Jews in the history of this country. From Pittsburgh to Poway to Muncie to Jersey City to Denver to Boston to Brooklyn and now to Colleyville. Esteemed representatives, this is a moment of crisis, unique crisis for the Jewish community in America. And we respectfully but urgently ask you to respond, to help and encourage the Congress to respond in full. Now, it is, of course, the responsibility of government to keep all its citizens safe in their places of worship and other spaces for gathering. But I want you to know that we in the Jewish Federations have also accepted the collective communal responsibility to ensure that all Jewish organizations are fully protected. We have raised and will continue to raise significant philanthropic funding for security work, but the resources needed are vast and ever increasing. Now, we have focused our efforts on two major areas. First, on providing expert professional security guidance to every community throughout our system. As we grow these initiatives, they will also help address the concerns with smaller communities that Rabbi Cytron-Walker mentioned in his testimony. And secondly, we focus on ensuring the physical security of our institutions and enhancing their preparedness posture against future attacks. In 2004, JF&A helped create the Secure Community Network. You're going to hear from Michael Masters next, and proposed and worked with Congress to create this federal nonprofit security grant program. Both of these are now crucial pillars of the safety and security of the Jewish community across the United States. Now, you will hear from my colleague, Michael Masters, the CEO of SCN, so you don't need to hear from me the important role that SCN plays partnering with Jewish federations in organizing local community security initiatives. 45 of the 146 Jewish communities now have such organized initiatives that have been created in partnership with SCN. And today, JF&A is working with SCN to extend this umbrella over every Jewish community throughout the United States through our Live Secure campaign, which is one of the largest philanthropic initiatives in our history. Unfortunately, even with this extensive funding, an additional infusion of significant governmental resources is necessary to achieve the level of security that we desperately need. Now, as members of the committee and my fellow witnesses have all mentioned, the FEMA nonprofit security program is that essential public-private partnership. We are so grateful for its resources and for the past support, but it is not without its challenges, others have noted, and I want to make 5 quick points and suggestions for improvement. First, of course, is the funding level, which has been referred to. There are somewhere between 350,000 and 400,000 houses of worship in the United States, and about another 1.2 million registered nonprofits. All of them could be potentially eligible for this program. Even if only 1% of these organizations know about and apply for the program in a given cycle, the FEMA and the local state authorities would be inundated with something like 15,000 applications, 5 times as many applications as applied in FY 2021. As we have shared with you, based on our experience and Beth's information, we believe that full funding would increase the current total to $360 million. Second, the program lacks sufficient management and administrative support. While the program has quadrupled in size since 2018 and is now the 3rd largest FEMA preparedness grant program by volume, FEMA and the state administrative agencies struggle to keep up with the necessary administrative oversight and infrastructure to carry out their duties. We support Congress allowing the NSGP program office to use some of the funds to cover their management and administrative costs. I understand my time is up. The third quick point is that the program lacks resources to assist nonprofits as they go through the application process. We encourage use of the funds for this purpose as well. Fourth, we encourage the NSG program to be waived from the requirements of the Paperwork Requirements Act so that they can more quickly adapt the program. And finally, they lack the statutory authority to fully respond to today's increasingly complex, diffuse, and dynamic threat in landscape. We urge the Congress to include appropriations language allowing FEMA to include hate and grievance-based crimes based on the ideology, belief, and mission of the applicant. I thank you for holding this important hearing, for indulging my testimony, and I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Congressman Fingerhut, for your testimony. And now we will recognize Mr. Masters to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Demings, Chairwoman Slotkin, Ranking Member Kamek, Ranking Member Pfluger, Chairman Thompson, and Ranking Member Katko, the full committee, distinguished members of the subcommittees. While the United States remains one of the safest places in the world for our community, we must make no mistake. America's Jewish community is under attack. Thank you all for taking action to stop it. I'm Michael Masters, CEO and National Director of the Secure Community Network, or SCN. It is an honor to appear before you again. SCN is the official safety and security organization of the Jewish community in North America. We work on behalf of and with the Jewish Federations of North America and my colleague Eric Fingerhut under his leadership, and the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, collectively representing over 90% of the Jewish community across North America. SCN is the Jewish community's official liaison with federal law enforcement, notably the FBI and DHS. Every day we are sharing intelligence with law enforcement and community partners, developing best practice safety policies, undertaking facility assessments, conducting life-saving training, and responding to incidents. We've worked with Jewish organizations in each and every one of your home states. To help us protect Jewish lives and those of all faiths, we are counting on all of you to support the funding desperately needed to help protect our community. It's critical for your subcommittees to understand that August 22nd, 2021 was a day that helped to save lives. That was the day that SCN worked with the Jewish Federation of Fort Worth and Tarrant County to lead a training at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. SCN worked with Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker and congregants on how to recognize suspicious behavior and what to do during an active threat situation. Let me just say how honored I am, how moved I am to be participating in this hearing with Rabbi Charlie. We teach people in our trainings to commit to action. This is what the rabbi and other hostages did on that horrendous day. Thanks to the efforts of law enforcement, the work that we did at SCN with the community made possible by the Federation and the system, but most importantly, the actions of the rabbi and other hostages, we are able to talk today about what we know saves lives. Our job at SCN is to secure our community so that the Jewish people can pray, celebrate, and gather in safety. SCN is a nonprofit organization. We're not volunteers or private contractors. We're security professionals whose full-time job is to serve the community. I've personally served in multiple law enforcement and homeland security roles, a police officer trained in special weapons and tactics, and a commissioned officer in the United States Marine Corps. As a security expert informed by my personal experience, I can attest without equivocation that FEMA's Nonprofit Security Grant Program, or NSGP, has placed the faith-based community in a better position to stay alive. The NSGP grants that you vote to fund provide bulletproof doors, shatterproof glass, secure entry systems, and so much more, like some of the cameras that were used by law enforcement on January 15th. Thanks to recent changes, it's now protecting more communities, places like Charleston and Charlottesville. NSGP funds can now be used to support training, just like the training that SCN provided in Colleyville. As we have heard, the training can literally be the difference between life and death. All of this means that more Americans of all faiths can worship and gather in peace. We need to expand these efforts and opportunities. The Jewish liturgy teaches us to welcome the stranger, as Rabbi Charlie noted. We have to ensure that our institutions remain open and welcoming, balancing the diverse needs and diversity of our community while being safe and secure. Comprehensive best practice approaches to security allow for that. The NSGP is a vital part of our efforts at SCN and our federation system, supporting our work and our open, free practice of religion. We know the demand for NSGP funds far outpaces what is available. Any additional funds Congress appropriates will allow us to protect more institutions and communities, and this is critical. As we've heard, the Jewish community is the #1 target of religiously motivated hate crimes in the United States. The National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin issued yesterday by DHS, referenced by Chairwoman Slotkin, highlights the continued threat environment across our country. It specifically references the ongoing calls for violence directed at soft targets, mass gatherings, and faith-based institutions, to include churches, synagogues, and mosques. We see the reality of this in our work at SCN every day. In 2021, SCN's Jewish Security Operations Command Center, or JSOC, took in over 11,000 instant requests and reports of threats. We referred hundreds of items to law enforcement. The attack on January 15th in Colleyville was just the latest example of the threat that our community faces, and it is a stark reminder also of why this hearing is so important. We learned from the Talmud we don't rely on miracles. But as Chairwoman Slotkin noted, we are not powerless. Last year, SCN trained over 17,000 members of the Jewish community. In just the last 4 weeks, we've trained over 12,000. There is a lesson to be learned from Colleyville. We will not choose the time and place of the next incident, but we can choose our preparation. Thankfully, as Rabbi Charlie noted, Congregation Beth Israel worked long and hard to prepare, but there are too many facilities and too many members of our community who have not yet been reached. Every Jewish facility in America has to be prepared. Every member of our faith-based community must be trained. Our efforts must be professional, specific, and ongoing, just like we do with fire drills. This is what the Jewish community, led by JFNA, as Eric Fingerhut and I have outlined, and SCN are working to do. We are not doing the work alone. Congress plays a critical role by funding the NSGP. In closing, no one in this country should ever question whether it's safe to walk into a religious institution. Echoing Ranking Member Pfluger, an attack on any religious institution is an attack on all of us. The NSGP has assisted in mitigating the threat, but there is a lot more work to do, and we don't have time to lose. Several weeks ago, we saw the impact. Rabbi Charlie Cytron-Walker and his congregants showed us by example the difference committing to action can make. Let us honor them and their efforts by being as committed. Thank you for inviting me to testify. I'm happy to take your questions.
I want to thank Mr. Masters for his testimony and all of our witnesses. I will remind the subcommittees that we will each have 5 minutes for questions from the panel. Also, one of our witnesses has a hard stop at noon, and so we want to be cognizant of that and get to each member that is on the call. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes or less. Rabbi Konokov, recently, as we've already discussed, we've seen the rise in anti-Semitism on display in Florida. We've talked about the demonstrations from the neo-Nazis in the place where you and I both call home. Could you just give me a kind of a quick overview of your views on the current threat environment? We know what we saw this 2 weeks ago, but what are your views on the current threat environment?
Well, I'll tell you, there are, in my opinion, there are people that unfortunately have hateful views. And sometimes some of these groups that come out and make statements and do demonstrations in the streets, it actually brings out or brings to the surface some of those, we'll call them crazies or hateful people, and that increases the danger. We happened to see when that group was in front of our center, they had a sign that said, "If you agree with us, honk your horn." And that was very disturbing to me. Thank God most people didn't honk the horn, but every once in a while there was a horn being honked, which was very, very, very disturbing. So they want to bring out other people to follow them. And I think that each event that occurs in the United States, it increases the danger, unfortunately.
Again, Rabbi, thank you so much for being with us. I am now going to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Kamek, for questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Demings. Couple of questions for Congressman Fingerhut. You had previously stated that in the wake of the Tree of Life shooting that, quote, the pace at which you were building out the security network wasn't fast enough. Now, how has that mission changed since 2018 in your comments then? And specifically, has FEMA taken steps to improve the outreach to the faith community, and what suggestions can you make specifically to outreach?
Thank you, Representative Kamek, for that question. There's no question that the Tree of Life shootings in Pittsburgh were the Jewish community's 9/11. I mean, it's the most horrific incident in the history of this country, and we both have to fight. We have to do what the United States did after 9/11. We have to build out a comprehensive system of homeland security that really fundamentally changes the way we protect every single institution of Jewish life. We were already well underway in building local community security initiatives through every federation. The federation works with SCN to develop a security plan for the entire community that includes every institution, every synagogue, every JCC, every human services agency, every day camp, every Hillel, in every Chabad in those communities. And then we work with the federations to raise the funds necessary to build out that security. The more professional they are, the more successful they are in applying for nonprofit security grants, because these grants require a level of expertise that are necessary. And together with our partners at SCN, we've helped local communities with that expertise to be able to apply for the grants. We've also been very happy to and have been successful in helping other faiths and communities with that expertise as well. However, as I mentioned in my written testimony more extensively, and I appreciate the chance to elaborate, the state authorities that would administer these grants and FEMA itself lack the resources to themselves provide the help to the nonprofits and faith-based institution. As I mentioned in my summary testimony, we're talking about close to 500,000 faith-based institutions in this country, and well over 1 million nonprofit institutions. If everybody, as they wake up to this growing need, were to apply, the system would be completely overwhelmed. We strongly urge that I would strongly urge that as part of the action that this committee recommends and the full Congress would take would be to authorize additional funding within FEMA to be able to assist nonprofits and faith-based institutions in the application process. Certainly, Rabbi Cytron-Walker spoke, eloquently about the impact on small synagogues and small communities, and that can be done by allowing them to utilize some of the funding, the additional funding that is allocated for this purpose. It would be a very beneficial improvement to the program.
Well, and thank you. And as a follow-up to that, what, in your opinion, could FEMA be doing specifically with outreach to these faith-based institutions for getting the word out about this? I spoke with several within my own district who were unaware that the program even existed.
Absolutely, Representative. It's an excellent point. FEMA, again, if they're given the resources, they could be doing much more to communicate directly out into the communities. But as well, I want to suggest that we in the Jewish Federation system, this is what we exist to do. Every community has a federation that is in touch with every synagogue and every institution. And of course, other faiths have similar networks and umbrella organizations that are in touch with each of their churches, each of their mosques, each of their centers. And we are already working with FEMA and with the state authorities, but we would welcome the opportunity to work more closely. Also, of course, with our partners at the Secure Community Network, this is part of what they do on our behalf, in the communities to reach out directly to more and more communities. It's an area of public-private partnership. Of course, as you know, these faith institutions are connected to each other. We are connected together through our Jewish federations and through other networks. And we would welcome the chance to partner more extensively with FEMA if they have the resources and support to do that.
Excellent. I appreciate your commentary, and thank you again to all our witnesses. With that, Chairman Demings, I yield back.
Thank you. The ranking member yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Slotkin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. I guess my question is for Rabbi Charlie. You've talked about the recommendations you have and on helping smaller communities write these grants or make the form more streamlined, of sort of the special problems around getting smaller communities the security that they need. And I know the staff are here busy taking notes, and I would propose, Madam Chair, that we work on some sort of comprehensive piece of legislation that does these fixes to these programs, which we know are good things, but have things that are sort of holding our smaller communities back. Rabbi, tell us some other things that you think we should be paying attention to when it comes to modifying some of these Homeland Security opportunities for security.
With regard to smaller congregations, I think one of the most important things is to listen, right? To hear what my reality is like on a Shabbat morning, to talk with small churches, small mosques, small temples from throughout the diversity of what exists within our religious landscape, and to really hear just how different it is when you have a smaller number of people showing up where you don't necessarily have the funds to do everything that you would want. You don't necessarily have the bandwidth to really be intentional about all of the processes, when the greatest debate within the synagogue or within the community has to do with the food being served, or how are we going to get enough volunteers to have this celebration, right? It's a really, really hard thing to have a dedicated group of volunteers focused on security issues that may never happen, but that we all need to be prepared for. Right, so understanding some of those realities, and for Congress to really be able to seek out that information, I think would be incredibly, incredibly valuable, so that the program can be tailored to do what you want it to do. Meet the needs of smaller communities, meet the needs of so many throughout this nation that want nothing more than to feel a sense of safety and security.
Thank you for that. And I think we will certainly come back to you as we try to shore up and improve the good programs we already have on the books. For Mr. Congressman Fingerhut and Mr. Masters, I think we're focused on this surge in hate crimes, particularly anti-Semitic incidents over the past few years. And we've seen this surge in conspiracy theories and sort of deep-seated prejudice come back out. We have this national bulletin that DHS just put out. Can you speak to the ways in which the convergence of anti-Semitism and extremist ideology and conspiracy theories are sort of playing out in increasing threats to the Jewish community?
Thank you. I'll suggest that Mr. Masters start, and then I can add to what he says.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Chairwoman. And this goes back to your opening statement, what we continue to see is the proliferation of what we are referring to more and more as sort of salad bar terrorism, where these conspiracy theories and online tropes, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation are metastasizing in people. And so literally they are finding this salad bar of ideas that they can go to. And it's having resonance with them. Our team of intelligence analysts and our JSOC, this is why we're referring incidents, individuals, and threats to law enforcement, local, state, and federal, in partnership with our communities every single day. And I want to highlight the partnership, particularly with the FBI, and the strong proactive stance that they've taken under Director Wray. But it is creating a hodgepodge where literally someone can find anything that appeals to them. And that's why we assess with federal law enforcement that we are in the most complex and dynamic threat environment of any point in the nation's history. And it makes it very, very difficult for you to pinpoint one aspect or one thing. So we saw that in the offender where in Colleyville, where he believed that there was, by going to the Jewish community, that there was innate power there that would allow for him to secure the freedom of a convicted terrorist. We saw across his ideology, and we see this quite commonly with other people, whether they are white supremacists, neo-Nazis. I think one thing that we have to remember, particularly with respect to physical target hardening, though, it doesn't matter the ideology that's coming through the door. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered so much. There's an academic discussion, and anti-Semitism. We're all trying to confront it. It's 3,000, well over 3,000 years old. But when we're talking about the safety and security of people who are looking to worship and pray in safety in our country, the ideology of the person that's trying to get in is somewhat irrelevant. We need to make sure that the door is locked and that the members of our community are alive to have that discussion. And that's really very important. And if I can go back to your former question very briefly on a key thing that we see with the NSGP that can help that for smaller congregations specifically is ensuring that the state administrative agencies deal with this program equitably. So if I look just at the state of Texas, where Rabbi Charlie is, last year, the notice of funding opportunity from DHS was released on 25 February. The state of Texas announced their program on the 14th of January, a full 6 weeks before DHS had even released the updated funding opportunity. And the state of Texas closed the funding opportunity, their application, less than 4 weeks later. So people only had 4 weeks to complete the application. And that means that for particularly smaller, underserved, unserved, less funded institutions, it creates an even bigger burden on them that is disparately impactful when you have other states where an institution may have 2 months. And that's something that I think we could address right away that would help the security and help our congregations.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairwoman, and appreciate again the opportunity to talk about this. I'll keep my question really focused because I think it's important, not just for this issue, but for so many other issues that we see. It really comes down to information sharing, between the local, state, and federal level. And regardless of the issue that we're facing, I think that really is kind of the key to making sure that we can identify, detect, and prevent bad things from happening. In the case of this, Mr. Masters, I'll kind of start with you. I mean, when it comes to the secure community network, let me just hone in and get very specific. I mean, where is it working? And honestly, more importantly, what can we do better and what needs to be done better?
Well, I think as my colleague Congressman Fingerhut pointed out, we have worked in the Jewish community to take a post 9/11 approach to this of coordinated information sharing, where we see things working very well. And I mentioned that we take 11,000 incidents and reports into our JSOC every year. We have incredible connectivity with federal and federal law enforcement specifically, and many state and local law enforcement agencies around the entire country. We need to encourage that intelligence and information sharing. We need to be able to identify when individuals are on these platforms and refer them effectively to law enforcement. Where we have, as Congressman Fingerhut mentioned, roughly 50 professional security programs in our communities, where we have former members of law enforcement working on behalf of the community, we see a 78% increase in incident reporting. They are identifying the threats. They are able to coordinate with law enforcement. They are able to coordinate with the community. What we need to do and what we are working to do as a community, particularly led by JFNA and SCN, is enhance that security shield over the whole community so that we have professionals that are good partners to law enforcement. On the law enforcement side, very briefly, we need to make sure that our fusion centers are communicating effectively the threats to state and local law enforcement, and that they are reporting those up effectively to the National Threat Operations Center at the FBI and to our partners and colleagues at DHS, and make sure that that's seamless. These bad actors are often, they're moving faster than the intel, and we need to close that cycle and make our apparatus move as quickly as they are.
Let me just follow up really quickly. I mean, are there areas throughout the United States where you are seeing a lack of support at the local level when there's information that's being pushed down, where we could be taking action, we could be identifying these threats, and yet we're not seeing that that support at the local level?
I think that we have built phenomenal relationships with law enforcement. You need to make friends before you need them in this business. And if you're introducing yourself to one another at a critical incident, you've probably failed. I think that we've done well on that. One thing that I think is critical that we enhance is the hate crime reporting. To go back to the statistics that Chairwoman Slotkin mentioned, over 11, or may have been Ranking Member Kamek, when we have roughly 1,100 religiously based hate crimes in this country, we know that's not a reality. When we create a security program at a federation, we see that incident reporting going up 78%. We need to make sure that we are promoting and pushing law enforcement agencies to identify, report, and then for prosecutorial agencies to prosecute hate crimes. We still have, the vast majority of communities, law enforcement agencies in this country report 0 hate crimes. The rabbis, Congressman Fingerhut, and I will tell you from working in the communities, that is just not a reality, and it needs to be corrected.
Well, thank you for that. And I think this underscores the need to have prosecutorial action to hold the law that we do have, the laws that are the law of the land, as the standard. And hate crimes are unacceptable in any form or fashion. I think this hearing clearly identifies that and clearly brings this issue up. But we must uphold the laws, and it's not okay to pick and choose which ones we're going to follow and which ones we're not. And so I very much appreciate this hearing. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I will now recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority, and alternating between the two subcommittees. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes. Ms. Jackson Lee, are you unmuted? We'll come back to you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Miller Meeks, the gentlewoman from Iowa, for 5 minutes. The chair will now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this very timely hearing. This has been an issue that has concerned me a great deal prior years on this committee, and the Chairman Thompson of the overall committee has done a tremendous job in continuing the efforts to secure funding around these grant programs. And I was honored to travel with him to Pittsburgh after the Tree of Life incident and speak to the rabbi and survivors of that horrible, horrible day. I also had tragedy in my district in Jersey City at a store where several people were killed. And it is just an intolerable situation around the anti-Semitism that we must curtail. So I commend you for keeping this on the forefront. And I will just hasten my questions as we have a large group to speak today. And this is for anyone that wants to answer. Virulent anti-Semitism content is too easily shared online, often via social media. How has social media been used to target your communities, either individually or via larger conspiracies that have spread online?
Mr. Representative Payne, I'll start, and I think probably my colleague, Mr. Masters, would have the best detailed knowledge of the situation. But I want to say that we are deeply aware that what is happening online is connecting potential attackers in any place to the information and the incitement and the radicalization that is coming from all over the world. And that makes every community a place of risk and every faith-based institution a potential target, precisely because of the issue that you are so insightfully raising. There is no place that is that is immune to this danger, precisely because of the threats online. And I have to say that you've raised it, and other members of the Distinguished Committee have raised it, the growing threats of anti-Semitism online and the wide range of issues that are being conflated together, all of which have anti-Semitism under, is the reason why we need to be protecting every single institution in every community. And as I've already mentioned, our partnership with SCN is working the Jewish Federations is working to build out the professional security system in every single Jewish community. And then that will enable us to work more closely with Fema on the nonprofit security grant program, if they're given sufficient resources, both for the grants and for the administration of the program. We simply must recognize that the point you've raised is the telling point in why every single community could be victim. Lastly, I'll add, and then again, maybe Mr. Masters would choose to add to this because he's an expert about what's happening online, is that we also need to enable Fema to use these grants in the broadest range of possible topics, the broadest definition of terrorism, the broadest definition of the risk. Currently, the definition is relatively narrow. We strongly encourage the committee to consider including report language or additional legislative language that would enable Fema to recognize that these threats are coming from every possible subject matter and ideology available.
Thank you.
Again, perhaps Mr. Masters has more to add.
Thank you. I would add, if we look back at the trajectory, or if you go back to, for instance, the Iranian Revolution in the 70s and 80s, and the use of audio tapes to build support for the Islamist movement, and then we think about Al-Qaeda and the publishing of fatwas and statements from bin Laden, the transition to Anwar al-Awlaki and videotapes, and then more recently, right, this trajectory where the so-called Islamic State then moved into really slick video programming, right, the advertisements and so on. And I think that's a blueprint. Now they're able to get on social media, and frankly, not enough was done quickly enough or aggressively enough or comprehensively enough to deplatform these individuals. And then when the threat, we've seen it with white supremacists and neo-Nazis, similar issues of removing them off the platforms. And then the other issue, when you take them off, they often move to encrypted spaces or harder to get to spaces. And so it becomes a really perplexing problem. We are seeing the transition now to gaming spaces, gaming platforms, and gaming adjacent platforms where people are playing videos as Hamas operatives who are destroying synagogues, blowing up synagogues. That's the video game. Or active shooter video games where someone's going into a school and pretending to kill nursery school age children. So this is really a pervasive problem. And as fast as we may try to counter it, The reality is that the people, the bad actors, are moving quickly, which means we need to really look, in my opinion, at a solution which engages the private sector and is honest. These are not government spaces. This is not a free speech argument. These are private companies that are making money, and we need to take an aggressive stand to ensure that the way they make money doesn't justify people being victimized, harassed, or justify the killing of individual innocents in this society.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and we will continue the efforts here on this committee to show the leadership that we need in this nation to curtail this type of activity. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes.
I thank my friend and colleague, Chairwoman Demings and Slotkin, and I thank the ranking members, Kamek and Pfluger, for holding this hearing today, ensuring that our homeland is secure and our Jewish brothers and sisters are safe is vital to our nation's success and our foreign relations. While the concerns being discussed here today will no doubt require more thoughtful and deliberate discussions, the nonprofit security grant program is a great example of providing both resources and training in case of a physical or impending threat. As a former law enforcement officer, a 12-year SWAT operator, I'm very familiar with the fact that every second counts. Shifting to the attack in Colleyville, it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Despite an extensive record of criminal behavior and a radical history, the suspect was permitted to travel to the United States and freely within our homeland. So there's a foundational principle, and biblically, Scripture says that the nation stands against Israel, stands against itself. May I say that very simple truth must permeate the Homeland Security policies and procedures and our determination to maintain law and order within our nation. We're a nation of immigrants, yes, legal immigrants, but we're first a nation of law and order. We must safeguard the homeland and confirm that those who come here are not intending harm to our nation. Without sovereignty and secure legal entry processes, our communities are at risk, and recent attacks prove that. Historically, this is just a fact. We have to get our heads wrapped around that. I offer a friendly ear to fellow members on both sides of the aisle to find solutions so our friends and communities, our churches and synagogues and places of worship can peaceably gather. I'd like to ask our rabbis Cytron-Walker and Concove, thank you for your testimony, for spending time with us today. Your service, your faith, your dedication to communities and congregation is noble. And let me say that domestic or international, any act of aggression or violence towards Israel and its citizens must be handled swiftly. As leaders of your respected communities, ensuring that your place of worship is secure must be a top priority. And I would ask you to clarify your relationship with local law enforcement. Historically, the Jewish community is very, very close with local law enforcement, and the thin blue line of law enforcement professionals across America face a particular persecution in this era in America. And I ask for your reassurance that the Jewish community stands solid with law enforcement, professional, compassionate, strong, and courageous law enforcement across the country. Would you agree that that's your position?
Well, Representative Higgins, if I may, thank you for those kind words. I was literally texting and emailing with the chief of Colleyville Police during those horrible hours. So the relationship between our community and the Colleyville Police Department has been very, very important And it's also important to note that the deadliest shooting at a house of worship wasn't an overt sense of hatred against Jews or anyone else. It was in Sutherland Springs in Texas, right? Which was so
Right.
horrible, right? And that happened in our state. And it was something that also, another one of those incidents that just touched all of us so deeply, and that it really does take all of us, right? I guess that's what I want to say. It really takes all of us on all sides of the aisle to come with that sense of curiosity and come with that sense that our status quo is not okay, right? That we can't do this as a society where this kind of violence is happening in our religious communities and in our schools and our religious institutions and nonprofits. We need that sense of security. We need these grants. We need these programs. And we also have to do more to work together to change that overall reality, because what we're going through right now, I don't believe it's sustainable. But I appreciate your work on these.
Rabbi, I could not, I can't imagine that it could have been better stated, the position. Thank you, sir, for your kindness. Madam Chair, I believe my time has expired.
Gentleman's time has expired. Thank you so much. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much to the chairs for this important hearing, crucial hearing, and as well to the ranking member as well. Let me take note of Mr. Masters' last comments when he said the Jewish way of life in the United States of America is under attack. Sadly, this hearing further confirms not only that and the rising increase of anti-Semitism, but again, the rise of racism and racial attitudes, which includes in particular the African-American community. So we're looking at two of the targets, and I am grateful for this hearing. Let me start, first of all, if it has not been submitted, to submit the DHS Issues National Terrorism Advisory System bulletin issued yesterday into the record as unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Thank you. And let me start with Rabbi Cytron-Walker. And our prayers were with you, but prayers needed action. But I think my outrage is that your congregation, a place of peace, a place of worship, something that the Constitution gives us a sense of comfort that we as a nation, the oldest democracy, had as the number one provision, the Bill of Rights, the right to freedom of religion, and you were violated. Can you tell me, Rabbi, first of all, I hope those who were held, I hope God is encouraging them, and the comfort of this nation lets them know that we care, and as well your congregants, I hope that they are knowing that America cares and we in the United States Congress cares. Can you tell me the one thing that you thought helped to bring you to safety? And did you find in the perpetrator a confusion or pointed focus?
I would say, first of all, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for the support. Our congregation has been overwhelmed in the most wonderful of ways by all of the support that we have received, myself and those who were held hostage. We've been working through it, and we have really appreciated just the incredible amount of support within and outside of our nation and our global world community. It's been unbelievable. In terms of the
perpetrator,
he was very focused on one thing, right? He was very focused on this idea that Jews controlled the world. Jews could pull the strings, that I could call the chief rabbi of America as far as he was concerned. And Rabbi Buchdahl, is absolutely amazing, but we don't have a chief rabbi in America. He thought that we could do that and he could get this person released. And That was his singular focus. That was his singular understanding. That idea that Jews control the world, the Jews control the media, the Jews control government, the Jews control everything. That was reality for him. Like, he deeply, in everything he shared, he believed that 100%. That America would care more about Jews than anybody else. And so there was no confusion about that. That was consistent every step of the way.
The height of anti-Semitism. Thank you so very much, and our prayers continue to be with you. Let me read into the record the language of this bulletin. Continued calls for violence directed at U.S. critical infrastructure, soft targets, and mass gatherings, faith-based institutions such as churches, synagogues, mosques, institutions of higher education, racial and religious minorities, government facilities and personnel, including law enforcement and the military, the media, and perceived ideological opponents. The gist of this bulletin says that this language, these acts, generate potential violence. We know that Mr. Greenblatt said in his last testimony before us, extremist white supremacist ideology is more than a collection of prejudices. It is a complete worldview. Can I hear from Mr. Singleton, Mr. Masters and Mr. Fingerhut, if I could? Could you both respond to the intensity of these actions and words turning into violence and how these grants are so crucial at this time? Mr. Fingerhut and then Mr. Masters. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. There's no question that the reason why it is necessary for us as a Jewish community to ensure that every single institution in the Jewish community is protected, both through physical protection and the professional security network that we're building in each community, is because of this rise of anti-Semitic speech and incidents. They don't all obviously manifest in violence, but they create the environment in which the individuals, such as those who've carried out these attacks, are motivated to act. So there is a direct correlation between the rise in anti-Semitism that our colleague Jonathan Greenblatt spoke to this Congress about, and while there is a full-throated effort to counter that anti-Semitism led by Mr. Greenblatt and our organizations and others, we also simultaneously have to protect and defend every Jewish institution. You know, I note that after 9/11, America both went on the offense against terrorism around the world, but also protected and built out the homeland security system that we are so familiar with today. And that's where we are in the Jewish community today. We have to both counter anti-Semitism wherever it is, but we must recognize that it will nevertheless result in these violent attacks, and we will protect every community. As you may have heard, Congressman Jackson Lee, we are in the middle of a major campaign to extend our professional security initiatives in partnership with SCN out to every single Jewish community organized through its federations, and then in each place also wish to partner in depth with local law enforcement, as previously was discussed, and also, of course, with this important FEMA grant program.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Demings and Chair Slotkin and ranking members Kamek and Pfluger for this important hearing. And certainly our hearts, our sympathies are with all of those in Colleyville for this horrendous attack. I went to school there and know the area very well. Mr. Masters, according to a report conducted by the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism, in 2020, there were 114 reported instances of Zoom bombing directed at Jewish institutions such as synagogues, Jewish community centers, and Jewish schools. Have you heard from your members about an increase in this or other types of cyber harassment?
Certainly. So, and thank you for the question. Particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, as our community moved online in many respects, Zoom and Facebook Live, we saw a dramatic increase in Zoom bombings. In particular, we worked with collaboratively with the ADL and Zoom, as well as other providers, to address safety and security settings. All told, we held national webinars to educate thousands of members of our community on how to implement those security settings to avoid the Zoom bombing. We also have seen during the pandemic more broadly a 40% increase reported into our intelligence center, our operations command center, of cyber intrusions and activity. And we work very closely, as I've mentioned, with the FBI and DHS. We anticipate that this is going to increase. I would note that particularly when we see international events that affect the state of Israel and the Jewish community throughout the world, we see an uptick in cyber activity, what we believe to be both from state and non-state actors, some affiliated with foreign terrorist organizations, others operating on their own potentially. This is very significant. What I would drive to with the point, and this goes to the physical security as well, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee's question, it's not just about the security, it is about the feeling of insecurity that is created in the community. Whether it is on Zoom or whether it is the question that Rabbi Konnikov identified of someone feeling uncomfortable, if we get to a place in our country, in this community, where people are uncomfortable walking to synagogues, sending their kids to Jewish day school, or participating in a Zoom, we will do far more damage to ourselves as a faith-based community and as a country than any single or group of terrorists could do. And that is why it is so essential that we have these funds to help us support the physical security, the cyber security, to create an empowered, resilient community. And we thank you for your support in making that happen.
And to that, to that end, an extension of this is that, and this is for any of the witnesses or either the rabbis as well, Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, has regularly live streamed its service, especially since the start of COVID, to ensure that its entire community would still be able to participate. This practice took a dark turn when Malik Faisal Akram took 4 people hostage, and when it allowed an unprecedented number of people to watch the attack in real time. And we know, given the state of culture now, the state of the internet and social media, and getting more likes and attention if you do egregious things. I mean, all of us have seen some of the horrific videos on the internet. Are you all concerned that having had this live streamed inadvertently would yield to copycat attacks as a result of the extremely public nature of the Colleyville attack?
Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
From a security perspective, the answer is yes. We saw this with the Christchurch, New Zealand attacker. We saw it with the attacker in Poway who attempted to live stream, and we saw the live stream impact in Colleyville. The short answer is yes. We are very concerned about this and the implication for copycats, and we need to work to address it. I'll defer to
and
Rabbi
it goes to the insecurity you just mentioned within the community and the insecurity to practice your faith.
Yes, ma'am.
Rabbi?
First of all, I want to say that I appreciate the hyphenated last name. Thank you for the opportunity. With regard, it's a very strange thing, because not only was this very, very public for us, we also have so much interest, right, and repeated interest on the Facebook platform that we want to be open and honest, and yet we're no longer mentioning the names of everyone who is sick that we are praying for within the congregation. We're trying to be conscious of a sense of privacy in a way that we've never had to think about in our world today. So it remains an ongoing issue for us in our community, and yet we want to be open. We want to be accessible for our, online. We want people to be able to pray with us and connect with us, and yet there's a whole host of new and not necessarily appreciated challenges that has come with this as well, and yet we remain committed to figuring out solutions. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, and we remain committed with you. I yield back my time, Chairman.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and the ranking member as well. To my friends who've assembled as witnesses, I thank you for your appearance today. It means a lot. And I'm going to address my question to my friend, Mr. Fingerhut. Friends, first, a bit of a preamble, if you will. I and a very dear friend, David Mintzberg, encountered bigotry many years ago. I was president of the NAACP. He was with the AJC. He was the lead person. And he and I took on this challenge. It was a challenge related to the African American community. But having the allies in the Jewish community made all the difference in the resolution. It's important for us not to silo our problems, that we should see these problems as a collective. They're our problems. They're not your problems. They're our problems. They're my problems. And we've got a duty to help each other in these times of need. And when we're not confronting persons who've said some ugly things, we have a duty to bond and let people know that we are friends and that we will stand together if ever you make a statement or if ever you do something that's inappropriate. You know that you can count on us. We have to count on each other. Now, having given that as my foundation, my predicate, I believe that we have to treat all bigots the same. We cannot make a distinction between one bigot and another. You can't conclude that if one bigot is beneficial. I have a term that I use now. It's called a beneficial bigot. A beneficial bigot has to be treated the same way you treat another bigot. If you make exceptions for beneficial bigots, those exceptions come back to haunt us. So I'm hopeful that we will, as we move forward together, and we must do it together, that when we encounter these circumstances, we will take them on and we will do it together, understanding that there can be no such thing as a beneficial bigot. So to my friend, Mr. Fingerhut, I appreciate your being here, and beneficial bigotry is the topic. How do you respond to my comment that we have to treat all bigots the same? Can't give a beneficial bigot a license to do what you wouldn't give another bigot the opportunity to do.
Representative Green, it's indeed a pleasure to speak with you again, and you've been such a champion on these issues. Thank you, sir. I of course agree with your comment entirely that we must treat all bigotry the same. And I want to emphasize that that as we grow the professional security systems initiatives that we are building across the entire Jewish community in each of our 146 Jewish federations, that one of the key roles of those professional community security directors, who of course are working with SCN and trained by them, is to build relations with not only local law enforcement, but also with other community representatives of other churches and mosques and other faiths, and that our federations work, of course, in partnership with the leaders of other faiths and NAACP and Muslim groups and others, so that we are sharing information, we are working together in a unified way, and supporting each other as we build out these necessary steps. You know, both rabbis spoke beautifully, and I know they in addition to caring for their congregations and doing all the pastoral responsibilities they have, they are also involved in interfaith activities and broadening their work across the community. But they can't do this alone. We have to offer them the sophistication and the professional help that we can through the Jewish Federation system and in partnership with the government, local law enforcement, and of course FEMA in this case on the nonprofit security grant. So we take your comments seriously, and we know we're all in this together, and we lock arms. And of course we have had to, as you and I have discussed, the Jewish community's had to be very aggressive in building out these security programs in every community, because we have been a significant disproportionate target of these violent attacks. But we know that we're not alone, and we are eager to do it in full concert with all faith communities and all communities that we can reach.
Madam Chair, I thank you for the time, and let me just close with this. Those who tolerate bigotry, perpetuate it. We cannot tolerate it. And again, I thank you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman's time has expired. Thank you for yielding back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Meyer from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the subcommittee for holding this here today, and to all of our guests who are joining to share their expertise and their experience. And I just have to follow on what many of my other colleagues have mentioned, and just, Rabbi Walker, thank you for the example that you set, for the just bravery that you showed. I know, in an era where we're all watching things occur and scrolling our Twitter feeds to find updates, our hearts sank when we saw the news, and then leaped at, the conclusion, and thanks again to your calmness under pressure. And it was a situation you should have never been in, but one that you handled, and your fellow victims kind of handled in a way that I think set in a powerful example. Rabbi Walker, I just want to kind of build on, again, some of the other questions here. You mentioned that you participated in about half dozen other security workshops that have been offered by the FBI, the ADL, Colleyville Police, and the Secure Communities Networks with Mr. Masters. Do you think your experience is representative of other faith leaders? Have you, has that degree of involvement with the resources that are available, do you feel that that's widespread and that there's sufficient awareness of the tools and resources available?
Thank you so much, Representative Meyer. I would say yes and no. That security summit that I attended with the FBI, I mean, it was a huge auditorium, and there were faith leaders from across every spectrum and background. When we hosted in our community, I want to say twice with the police department and again with the FBI. I could be remembering those differently, but in our congregation, we invited members of our interfaith community, religious leaders, lay leaders, to participate. Our Colleyville Police Department did a session on the development of a security action plan with faith leaders from across the community. And it just depends on who shows up, right? A community has to feel on the need and the desire, right? And unfortunately, a lot more people feel that as it hits closer to home. But let's be realistic about this. What happened to us is the most recent horrible thing, but things have been happening for years. And it's a matter of, when does that wake-up call happen, that we need to be prepared? And so that education, and also that sense that being prepared doesn't mean you expect it to happen, right? That's a really, really important point. Just like CPR, just like the fire drills, as was mentioned before, you don't count on tornado drills. You're not expecting to get hit by a tornado. You're not expecting a fire to happen in the building. There needs to be a sense of awareness and preparation. And unfortunately, in far too many schools, right? So many public schools and private schools, they are doing lockdown drills, not because they expect it to happen, but it just makes sense to have that preparation. And so it doesn't matter the institution, from Jewish to Muslim, Baha'i, atheist, right? All of us, right? I mean, everyone from every background, unfortunately, we need that sense of preparation.
Well, and certainly mentioning that recency, we're holding this hearing in the wake of what happened in Colleyville. It is fresh of mind, and I think it's not at all surprising to see an increased focus on connecting our faith community with the resources that are available, but then also that obligation and the necessity of, once more time passes, to continue that engagement, to continue pushing those resources out, so that we don't let the time that passes, distract us from the underlying mission. So again, Rabbi, I really appreciate you joining us here today. Appreciate you sharing those comments. Thank you for leadership that you showed. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Landrivan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony today, and I apologize I wasn't able to stay for the entire hearing. I was on another hearing with Armed Services Committee, but did want to get back here to again thank our witnesses and ask a couple of questions. So if I could start with you, Rabbi Cytron-Walker. So you spoke in your testimony about the understandable burdens that small congregations like yours face in navigating the paperwork requirements of nonprofit security grant program. And are there other challenges with NSGP which are unique to small congregations that you and Rabbi Konnikov have experienced or have heard of others experiencing?
I don't know all of the specifics, but I do know that if it were not for one volunteer who basically made it almost his full-time job for, weeks at a time to try to get this together. I mean, so many hours in the back room, going through the grants, making sure it was right, making sure it was accurate. We wouldn't have received the grant. And I can't imagine what it was like for my colleague in Florida, right? I just know that it's really, really challenging. In terms of that general trend, since I don't know that I wasn't the one applying for it, but I think that Mr. Masters might be able to speak to that in a more broader sense, a more global sense. But I can tell you that it's really, really hard for smaller congregations to do it.
Thank you.
I agree as well, by the way.
Sure, do you have something to add?
I agree to that same idea. I mean, it is a very extensive project to do. We actually enlisted the Chabad security in Florida to help us with it. And they've told us that those who received or awarded the grant in 2020, most of those that they've been helping have not received the funds yet, because between FEMA and the Florida Department of Emergency Management, there's just been a lot of back and forth, and many have just not received yet because the process has been going very slow.
Okay, thank you for that. Here's a question for all of our witnesses. In cases where nonprofit organizations are needing to make sustained investments in their security, have they run into challenges in securing multiple grants over time from the nonprofit security grant program? And if so, is it clear why some applications from a certain organization were accepted and others were not?
Sir, I'll attempt a first answer at that question. For one, there is an ability to receive multiple grants over the years. There is a weighting system that has a preference for first-time applicants. So we have seen over the years from 2006, as my colleague Congressman Fingerhut mentioned when the grant program was first created, as the pool has expanded, as more money has become available, more people have applied, and that's a good thing. That has made it somewhat more competitive, obviously. There is a possibility for institutions to get multi-year grants. I think as more institutions have applied, and certainly as it has expanded to those communities that traditionally could not apply, our non-urban area communities, then we've seen more applications and more first-time individuals getting funded. I would note when it comes to some of the complications with respect to the grant, there is, as I mentioned earlier in another answer to a question, there is disparity across the state administrative agencies, which can make things complicated. The authorized equipment list from which you can purchase items was not really designed for faith-based institutions or lay people to take advantage of. It's the same authorized equipment list if I was running a major gas refinery and I was trying to use equipment to fund from there that I would be using. And I think there are ways to make the process easier for those first-time applicants, as Congressman Fingerhut mentioned, with respect to increased support for first-time applicants. That's frankly what we're doing a lot of in the Jewish community. through the joint effort of JFNA and SCN to make grant writers available, to do more assessments, et cetera. But there's a lot of work to do, and there's more organizations than we can service. So anything that can be done from your side or the FEMA side to increase their ability to support would be helpful.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for bringing us together today. Thank you to each and every one of our witnesses. The information has been so helpful. Rabbi Charlie, it is so good to be able to have this conversation with you. God bless you. And my blessings to your whole congregation and even those who were there on that day. I don't have a question. Let me just say this. I heard you. I heard about the difficulty in the application process. I heard about the unpredictability and continuity of the application process. And I heard that we need additional resources to be applied. And I also heard loud and clear that we recognize that we're all in this together, Black, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, Sikh, whatever. We are always considered the other now, and we must show this country that we're together. We're together in this message. We're together in our unity, and we will stand together for the democracy in this country. So I thank you for the opportunity to hear what you had to say today. And Madam Chairwoman, thank you so much. And to you, Madam Chairwoman Slotkin, for bringing us together and giving me this opportunity. I yield back.
Thank you so much. The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Malinowski, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for your presentations. I am both delighted that we are holding this hearing and incredibly sad that we have to hold this hearing. So the nonprofit security grant program is incredibly important in my home state of New Jersey. We've had our share, arguably more than our share, of anti-Semitic incidents and other attacks on people based on their faith and race in recent years. I think we're number 2 in the country in terms of anti-Semitic attacks since 2020. I've held a number of workshops in my district for faith leaders interested in the grant program, and we've helped them take advantage of these resources. But I also totally agree, we do not have enough resources, and the numbers bear that out. Fully 45% of applications right now are rejected by FEMA, and grant applicants often are not informed why they are rejected. That's something that we have to fix. And obviously we need more resources. And for that reason, I have been a strong supporter ever since I've been elected of increasing funding for this program, and I will continue to do so. And at the same time, every single time I sign a letter to increase funding, every single time I co-sponsor a bill to increase funding, I feel a sense of defeat. Because as I'm sure all of our witnesses would agree, even though we have to harden our places of worship, the solution to this problem is not at the gate of our places of worship. If we wait until the attacker is at the gate, well, we've already, in a sense, failed. And so that's really what I want to ask our witnesses about. Why, in your view, is this happening? Why is it, perhaps Mr. Fingerhut, you mentioned that we're living through the most intense period of attacks on the American Jewish community in the history of this country. Why, from your standpoint, is this happening right now?
Well, Representative Malinowski, thank you for the question. And I know that these committees held a hearing just recently on the rise in anti-Semitism and the relationship to all the various political and radical movements that are happening across the spectrum, around the world. And in a previous discussion in this hearing, the the impact of social media, the impact of the internet to be able to bring these things into every community, into anybody's home, anybody who wants to reach this hatred. The key for us is that we just know that it's not going to end. The wave is still rising, and so we have to be prepared. And if I might just take the moment of your question, there have been so many excellent comments about the challenges the current nonprofit security grant program faces. There are things that this committee can do, even in legislative language associated with appropriations that that can help address them. We need to give FEMA more flexibility and authority quickly and support. Waive the Paperwork Requirement Act. I mentioned a number of these things in my written testimony that has been submitted for the record. Representative Malinowski, I wish I had a better answer for you on why, but I know that it's real and it's growing and it's not going to end soon, and so we have to give our partners in government all the resources and flexibility needed to act now.
Yes, and we should. On social media, let me put it this way to you. Imagine there were a company in America that tracked the online behavior of every single person in this country and the world. And every time they found somebody expressing views along the lines of Jews control the world or anything like that, a representative of that company picked up the phone and called that person to say, hey, couldn't help but notice you just expressed some really interesting views, and we'd like to introduce you to 10 other people who share your views. We'd like to help you get together with those people and help you explore your interest in combating those horrible Jewish people who are trying to control the world. Would you think that would be a pretty bad thing?
Absolutely, and perhaps
and that's what social media companies do, of course.
Absolutely, Mr. Malinowski. And
yeah, so this is something that we are looking very hard at. Obviously, it's not a guy picking up the phone making a call. It's an automated algorithmic system, but it functions in precisely that way.
If I might add, it's one of the reasons why all of our community security programs through each of our 146 federations will be connected through the security efforts of the SCN, so that kind of information online, when a threat is identified anywhere in any community, can be immediately broadcast out to all of our security directors in every community, because we know that they are doing exactly what you said. They are introducing the radicals to more people, and that it will quickly spread. Copycats, similar, they will show up online, and through our partnership with SCN, we're able now to get that information out to every community.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for this timely hearing. The threats against the Jewish community are rising at an alarming rate. As we know, just this week, the National Terrorism Advisory System, Bolton, warned of the role of disinformation is playing in motivating domestic extremists, with a stress on the interest in targeting religious and racial minorities. There are even reports stating an uptick in calls by extremists to replicate what occurred at Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. I want to take a moment to highlight the courage, as my colleagues have, of Rabbi Cytron-Walker, a horrific hostage situation in Colleyville. We're very, very thankful for you and for what you did, and help the other hostages make it out safely. Rabbi Cytron-Walker, your actions during the hostage crisis have inspired many, of course, and you've reminded the people of the real threat facing the Jewish community. How can DHS and other agencies better support your community and others like it? And I know you've answered some of this. If there's anything you think we have not addressed, I'd be grateful.
I would say that one thing that hasn't been mentioned to the extent that maybe it needs to is that idea of, I mean, it has been stated, right? We need those relationships before something bad happens. We need the relationships on the national, state, and local level with regard to government. We need those relationships within our interreligious communities on a local level. We need to know one another, which is, we don't have to be experts in one another's religions, but we do need to know each other and see each other and see the humanity within, whether we're talking about the more progressive religions, the more conservative religions, everybody in between, those without any religion. We need that sense of relationship and to encourage that relationship and to make those possible. In addition to all of the many possibilities that this committee can do, right? Along with, as has also been mentioned, that idea of acknowledging the hatred that exists. Again, we don't have to agree with everyone. We're not going to agree with everyone. But when we can see the humanity in each other, before we choose how to disagree, right? To know that we're all human, we're not enemies, right? Regardless of whatever political side of the aisle, regardless of our religious faith, we need to all be on the same team. And when we can be on the same team and tone down that rhetoric, right? And that's a responsibility that all of us have. Religious leaders, elected officials, from every part of government, when we can do that, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference.
To that point, you've obviously been a leader in teaching members of society about the roots and solutions to hate, particularly in light of the disgusting Nazi rally in Orlando and others. This is more important than ever. I was proud, like many of my colleagues, to support the Never Again Education Act in 2020, expanding U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum education programming. Are there other ways to promote a deeper understanding of the lessons from historic anti-Semitism? Other steps you think we should be taking that we're not?
Was that again to me? Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Rabbi. Yes, Rabbi Cytron-Walker, sorry.
Yes. Okay. No, thank you. Thank you again. I think with regard to Holocaust education, I think that unfortunately, from my understanding of the research, and Congressman Fingerhut could probably, or, like there's others who could probably do better than I, but my understanding is that Holocaust education in this country is actually decreasing instead of increasing. And that is something that, this is one event, one period of time that is so important for us from a historical perspective. Unfortunately, it teaches, the worst experiences of what hate can do, of what dehumanization can do. It's not the only story, right? I just had an opportunity to visit the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, which focuses in not only on the Holocaust, but also human rights across the board. And that is an incredible resource to educate, and they do so in the DFW area in an incredible way. And that kind of education is helpful across the board to not only better understand the Holocaust, but once again, to understand how we are all connected as human beings.
Well, you're right, and the nonprofit security grants and other measures that Mr. Fingerhut has spoken about are so critical to protect synagogues, but also to make sure we're doing everything we can and make sure we have more resources, not less there, which I think is so important. Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back to our witnesses. Thank you so much for your patience. And finally, the chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Rice, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just want to raise two quick issues that have already been pretty much acknowledged and talked about by some of my colleagues. I am very grateful for the millions of dollars that New York and specifically my district on Long Island have gotten. But I have heard from Jewish and interfaith organizations that present funding levels are clearly insufficient to meet the current needs. This year, we had 7 incredibly strong applicants from my district who were denied funding. And even those that receive grants often find that their award is insufficient to cover the needed security updates. Now, these rejections are especially frustrating because these organizations aren't told why they've been rejected, only that they have been. So I appreciate the work that's being done that I think Mr. Masters talked about in terms of help that's given to first-time applicants. But we also need to worry about the applicant who maybe is not the first-time applicant, but gets denied and without any explanation. So just to you, Mr. Masters, well, first of all, I think we all agree that we have to put more money into this program across the board. But how can we make it better? Maybe, I don't know if it's an issue of transparency or maybe giving organizations that are denied their initial application a chance to make changes so that they can receive these grants. Maybe you can just kind of talk a little bit about how ways that we can fix this and give more certainty to the applicants during that process.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think you identified perhaps one of the biggest complaints that we hear across the entire Jewish community, but also when we are asked to provide advice or counsel to our partners in other faith-based communities or nonprofit communities, lack of feedback. Yeah. So you submit an application, it goes to the state administrative agency, and then it goes to Fema. And when it's rejected, there's no clarity on whether it was rejected for a material deficiency in the application. Did I not put the correct SAM or DUNS number? Or was my threat section or my investment justification section off? So just the very basic, I mean, even if we just provided, was it a material deficiency or was it something in your narrative in the objective part of the subjective part of the application, which was problematic, would be a huge advantage. And then if you carry that.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? So what I'd like to know is, are people being rejected just because there is no, they're making the decision that there's no money and that these other organizations are more deserving at this time than you? But if that's the case, then they should know that too. And it sounds to me like FEMA makes that ultimate determination of why they're rejected, but does not give the reason. I mean, is there a way that we can require a reason to be given?
Well, so every state gets a specific amount of money, and every urban area does. So that the state actually identifies through their process who's getting it from the state level until that pot of money gets to zero. So very feasibly, you could have someone that has a good application, but because there's not enough money, they don't get awarded. Then you could have people that have they have problems with their application itself, and they're not getting feedback on those applications. That's something that we as the federation system have worked to do in looking at many of those applications that were rejected and providing feedback. And I think my colleague, Congressman Fingerhut, probably has something to add on that as well.
Yeah, I just thank you so much, Mr. Masters and Representative Rice. I just really do want to point out that we believe that FEMA just simply doesn't have the resources right now to give the kinds of responses that Mr. Masters and you are speaking of. We strongly urge that some portion of these increased funds be allocated both to FEMA and to the state authority so that they can give that necessary feedback. And I also mentioned to Mr. Malinowski, but I want to repeat that they also probably need a waiver of the Paperwork Reduction Act so they can quickly update and modernize their application forms, and even some additional broader authority on language as to what the risks, the threats are that are being covered, because these threats are just multiplying faster than the legislative authority language they have, has enabled. And I believe I'm certainly out of date as to the functioning of this committee from my time there, but certainly as much of this that can be done either in report language or legislative language around the appropriations, even before maybe some changes are made to the authorizing language, the authorizing bill would really be timely and responsive together with the funding increase.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. I ask unanimous consent to enter a statement from the Anti-Defamation League into the record without objection. With that, I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. The chair reminds members that the committee's record will remain open for 10 business days. Without objection, the subcommittee stand adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, everyone. That was great. Much appreciated.
The Committee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection and Innovation, and the Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security will come to order for today's hearing, entitled Transportation Security, Protecting Planes, Trains, and Pipelines from Cyber Threats. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittees in recess at any point. Let me start by thanking Chairwoman Watson-Coleman and Ranking Member Garbarino, Ranking Member Jimenez, and our panel of witnesses for joining us today. We are here to assess the administration's actions aimed at mitigating the cybersecurity challenges facing the transportation sector. Earlier this year, our subcommittees worked together to evaluate how the federal government partnered with the private sector to respond to a ransomware attack against Colonial Pipeline, which resulted in 5,500 miles of pipeline being shut down. As panic led to fuel shortages at gas stations along the East Coast and airlines scrambled to find alternative fuel supplies, we learned that 1, attackers infiltrated Colonial Pipeline's business network using a legacy VPN that did not require multi-factor authentication. 2, the flow of information between Colonial Pipeline, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and the Transportation Security Administration was slow, fueled in part by ongoing confusion about which agency was in charge. And 3, despite repeated offers from TSA, Colonial Pipeline had not yet undergone an important security assessment, a validated architecture design review, and did not have a disaster response plan that contemplated the full scope of cyber threats. Shocked by what we learned during their oversight of Colonial Pipeline and other recent high-profile cyber incidents, members of Congress have begun to question whether the federal government's approach to cybersecurity, which relies primarily on voluntary partnerships, actually works, or whether some security requirements ought to be mandated. The notion that certain entities should be subject to cybersecurity standard mandates is not new. Almost 10 years ago, President Obama issued Executive Order 13636 and improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity. The executive order directed sector risk management agencies to evaluate whether they had sufficient authority to establish cybersecurity requirements for critical infrastructure entities for which a, quote, cybersecurity incident could reasonably result in catastrophic regional or national effects on a public health or safety, economic security, or national security, end quote, and report back to DHS and the White House with what they found. To the best of my knowledge, no agency suggested they lacked authority to issue such requirements. Nevertheless, for nearly a decade, the federal government has continued to pursue security policies that rely primarily on voluntary partnerships with the private sector. That's why the security directives that TSA issued for pipelines and the requirements TSA plans to issue for rail, transit, and aviation deserve such careful attention. They mark a pivotal transition in the federal government's approach to cybersecurity. As a representative from Brooklyn, I welcome TSA's renewed interest in improving the cybersecurity posture of the transportation sector. New York City is a transportation hub, home to 2 major airports, several rail lines, and the largest mass transit system in the nation. Just 6 months ago, hackers reportedly tied to the Chinese government breached the Metropolitan Transit Authority's network. Fortunately, they did not gain access to operational systems that control rail cars, but I remain concerned about the cybersecurity of mass transit systems generally and MTA's network in particular. Given the degree to which middle and low-income people rely on public transportation, a cyber attack affecting mass transit could have a disproportionate impact on these populations. In light of the conversations I've had regarding cybersecurity threats to rail and aviation, I also support TSA's efforts to raise the bar on cybersecurity for these subsectors. That said, as the federal approach to securing critical infrastructure evolves, we must get it right. TSA's security directives on pipelines and pending security directives on transit, rail, and aviation present an opportunity to better understand the administration's security goals, how the security directives align with those goals, and the private sector's ability to effectively implement the directives. Today, I hope to identify the lessons learned from the rollout and implementation of the pipeline security directives so we can use them to inform future transportation security directives to ensure that they are buying down risk and yielding the security benefits we expect. More broadly, I hope today's conversation will provide insight into how we can raise the cybersecurity posture across critical infrastructure sectors. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure Protection, and Innovation, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Clark and Chairwoman Watson-Coleman for holding this important hearing today. And thank you to my colleague, Ranking Member Jimenez, for his continued leadership on transportation security. As you know, cybersecurity remains a bipartisan cooperation in Congress. Bringing together these two subcommittees is a continuation of the bipartisan spirit that makes this community function so well. But there remains room for improvement. This year, the full committee and our cybersecurity subcommittee have held several hearings in the aftermath of major cyber incidents to review the state of our nation's cyber preparedness and assess the overall efficacy of response mechanisms across the federal government and within various industry sectors. This joint hearing is a great opportunity to continue that work, focusing on the transportation sector, which impacts millions of Americans and many of my constituents. Every day, Americans are already experiencing the impact of a pervasive supply chain crisis. Goods are becoming more expensive and harder to find. Nearly every sector of our economy has been affected by this problem, which is particularly acute in the auto industry. We've already witnessed the impact of a devastating ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline, which led to gas shortages on the East Coast. Imagine a similar attack on a major U.S. port, airline, or major logistics company as the holidays approach. We must ensure that there's a robust partnership between the Department of Homeland Security, particularly the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the Transportation Security Agency, and the U.S. Coast Guard, and the owners and operators of our transportation systems. I hope that this hearing reviews the cyber preparedness of our critical transportation systems and how agencies like CISA, TSA, and the Coast Guard can enhance their programs, services, and guidance to best ensure entities can defend and mitigate the threat of cyber attacks. I'm particularly interested in learning more about DHS's use of security directives as a tool for enforcing new security standards. I'd like to hear testimony and learn from our witnesses regarding the impact of security directives and how TSA is working with relevant partners to ensure robust industry input because they know their sector best. I'd also like to hear from our witnesses on the extent to which industry expertise and feedback is utilized in the creation of these security directives. Members of this committee, including myself, are actively engaged in crafting mandatory cyber incident reporting legislation to improve CISA's visibility into cyber incidents impacting our nation's critical infrastructure. I thank Chairwoman Clark for her leadership and partnership on this effort. I've also been working closely with Ranking Member Katko and Representative Spanberger to introduce bipartisan legislation to authorize the director of CISA to establish a stakeholder-driven, transparent process for identifying the owners and operators of our nation's most critical infrastructure, known as seismically important critical infrastructure. How can we expect CISA and other sector risk management agencies to prioritize limited services if we don't know what is most critical? It is also incumbent on Congress to ensure such a program includes the appropriate guardrails, guidance, and built-in mechanisms for industry collaboration. Such an important program must be done right. I believe that securing systemically important critical infrastructure strives these very principles. I'm disappointed that the committee held a markup this morning. This legislation was not included, despite months of industry collaboration and attempts to collaborate with the majority. I hope it comes soon. I do want to note Representative Langevin's leadership on this important issue and his transparency with the minority. I look forward to working with him and with you, Chairwoman Clark, on this legislation to continue the bipartisan nature of our subcommittee. Lastly, I'll just say that the issue of transportation cybersecurity hits close to home. It was shortly after New York's MTA systems were hacked in April and discovered in June, in which Secretary Mayorkas announced intentions to create a new security directive for major rail and aviation entities. I look forward to learning from our panelists here today about what this community can do to help TSA, CISA, and the Coast Guard work towards an enhanced public-private partnership with owners and operators of our nation's transportation system. Thank you very much, Chairwoman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Garbarino. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security, the gentle lady from New Jersey, Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Clark, and to our ranking members, Jimenez and Garbarino. Thank you for coming together around this very important issue. And to our witnesses, thank you for being willing to discuss this critical topic. I want to be crystal clear. When it comes to transportation cybersecurity, inaction is not an option. When gas stops flowing due to a cyber attack, it doesn't just impact the pipeline owner. It means Americans struggle to fill up their tanks. If hackers succeed in bringing down a plane or derailing a train, it's not an airline or railroad that would pay the steepest price. Indeed, the real cost would be borne by the passengers injured or even killed. Simply put, when you own critical infrastructure, people's lives and livelihoods depend on your cybersecurity. Yet despite the stakes, most transportation operators currently have no obligation to meet even baseline cybersecurity standards. The status quo is dangerous. We're all familiar with the attack on Colonial Pipeline, but just this year, hackers have also targeted New York's MTA, as stated, the Massachusetts ferry system, the Port of Houston, one of the largest depositories of airline passenger records, a leading pipeline maintenance company, and global freight railroads, and the list goes on. Unquestionably, our nation's transportation systems are facing a crisis. Fortunately, TSA has begun the process of requiring critical operators to take basic cybersecurity precautions. The recent cybersecurity directives for pipelines and Secretary Mayorkas' announcement of forthcoming requirements for rail, transit, and aviation are justified, necessary, and an important first step. But more action is even needed. For instance, TSA must ensure all transportation modes are covered, particularly as vehicles become increasingly connected and autonomous. The cybersecurity of motor carriers and buses cannot be forgotten. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard needs to hold ferries, ports, and other maritime systems to similar standards. There's also the question of implementation and enforcement. If an operator proposes an alternative procedure that maintains robust cybersecurity, TSA needs to provide timely, substantive feedback. By the same token, if operators fail to comply, leaving our nation's critical infrastructure vulnerable to attack, TSA must have the resources to enforce the rules. And ultimately, TSA should pursue traditional notice and comment regulations so that stakeholders can offer meaningful input. But these conversations around implementation shouldn't distract from a fundamental fact. There's no substitute for mandatory transportation cybersecurity requirements like those that are announced by TSA and Secretary Mayorkas. While many operators employ best practices, invest in cybersecurity talent, and coordinate with government voluntarily, some cut corners and put us all at risk. Without requirements, there's nothing to compel those companies to improve. That's a prospect we cannot take lightly, because in the 21st century, physical security and cybersecurity are two sides of the same coin. Historically, to hijack a plane, you had to clear TSA's checkpoint and then breach the cockpit. Today, it may be possible to hijack a plane by hacking it. The same is true for railroads, subways, and other modes. Cameras and guards are no match for a hacker seeking to control or derail a train. This isn't science fiction. This is the future, and cybersecurity requirements for all modes are the way to prepare for it, as well as tackle today's immediate threats, such as ransomware and state-sponsored data theft. A recent study found that only 60% of transit agencies have a cybersecurity preparedness program in place, and the surge in cyber attacks against railroads, airlines, airports, and maritime assets suggests an equally grim picture in these modes. This is our moment to ensure that every transportation operator in America prepares themselves for 21st century threats. We can't wait until a hacked plane falls from the sky or a breached railroad gridlocks our nation's supply chain to take action. I look forward to hearing from our panel today about what can be done to shore up the cyber defenses of our transportation system. Again, I thank the witnesses for joining us, and Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from New Jersey. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Clark and Watson Coleman, for holding this important hearing today. And to Ranking Member Garbarino as well. I'm glad that we can bring these two subcommittees together to discuss how to protect our vital aviation, surface, transportation, and maritime systems from cyber threats. I know firsthand from my time as mayor of Miami-Dade County how important these systems are to the flow of people and goods and the overall health of our economy. As we're seeing right now with supply chain challenges and the increasing prices in everyday goods, keeping our transportation system operating at a high level is imperative. The recent ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline only served to highlight what owners and operators of these critical infrastructure systems already knew. A significant cyber incident has enormous ramifications to their systems and can cripple the goods and services that our nation needs. Transportation system owners and operators have enhanced their cybersecurity practices and real-time information sharing over the years. But there's always more that can be done to strengthen our defenses, and it's imperative that we do so. As TSA moves forward with new cybersecurity directives for aviation, rail, and mass transit in the next few weeks, it's important that industry is fully consulted as these requirements are drafted and implemented. The owners and operators know their systems the best and what is workable. Having a strong public-private partnership as new cyber requirements are imposed in the transportation sector is key. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today on their perspectives on how to strengthen cybersecurity throughout our transportation system. And Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member from Florida, the gentleman, Mr. Jimenez, for his statement. And members are also reminded that the committees will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. I now welcome our panel of witnesses. Ms. Suzanne Spalding is a senior advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and before that, Ms. Spalding served as the Undersecretary for the Department of Homeland Security's National Protection and Programs Directorate, which Congress redesignated as CISA in 2018. Next, we have Ms. Patricia Cogswell, a senior strategic advisor for the National Security at Guidehouse, who served as the Deputy Administrator for the Transportation Security Administration from 2018 through 2020. I would also like to welcome Mr. Jeffrey Troy, the President and CEO of the Aviation Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or the Aviation ISAC. Prior to the Aviation ISAC, Mr. Troy served as a Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI's Cyber Division. Finally, we will hear from Mr. Scott Dickerson, the Executive Director of the Maritime Transportation System Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or the MTS ISAC. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize her or his statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Ms. Spalding. Ms. Spalding, I think you have to unmute.
Madam Chairwoman, can you hear me at this point?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Chairwomen, ranking members, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify today in this joint hearing on TSA directives aimed at ensuring the security and resilience of the aviation, rail, and pipeline sectors against significant cyber incidents. As the former Undersecretary at the Department of Homeland Security, where I led what is now called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and as a member of the congressionally created Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and even going back to my involvement with the Commission on Cybersecurity for the 44th President, which was run out of my current organization, CSIS, I have always favored voluntary market-based solutions to cybersecurity, as they are generally more efficient and flexible. However, I have reluctantly had to conclude that we cannot rely upon markets alone to ensure the continuity of nationally critical functions upon which the American public relies. First, the purely voluntary approach simply has not gotten us to where we need to be, despite decades of effort. The threat is evolving much more quickly than our defense. Even in these key sectors where there's been significant progress on cyber, there is still a need to ensure continued investment across all vital assets. And even in a perfect market, there are external impacts on society and the nation from inadequate cybersecurity that will simply not be captured in a business's bottom line or their calculation of return on investment. Externalities have long justified regulation and mandates, such as with pollution and highway safety. This is the thinking behind a number of recommendations from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. First, we looked at ways to improve the performance of relevant markets, including by providing better market incentives, greater transparency, more information, to improve the cybersecurity behavior of firms. But the Solarium Commission, too, ultimately concluded that the market alone was not going to be sufficient to provide the level of security and resilience that's urgently needed for the most important elements of our infrastructure, particularly what the Solarium calls systemically important critical infrastructure. We recommended creating a transparent methodology for identifying these most critical systems and assets, and then building a closer relationship between the federal government and the firms that own and operate these systems. The government should offer a suite of benefits like improved intelligence sharing and operational support, but industry should also accept burdens like requirements for security behavior and enhanced incident reporting. Consistent with this thinking, I believe it is appropriate for TSA to use its existing authority to put basic requirements in place for the most critical assets in these three sectors. The details will be important, but as described, these directives seem like a step in the right direction. Collaboration with industry will continue to be an imperative as TSA further develops these directives and perhaps follow-on regulations. Industry has a level of expertise that will be essential in understanding what needs to be done. It must be at the table to help craft directives that are ambitious but achievable, and government must invite them early enough in the process to allow them to make a meaningful contribution. In addition, those who depend upon these critical sectors should also make their voices heard in this process. Moreover, requirements should be informed by an awareness of the tools and technologies that are available to help these asset owners and operators gain visibility into their information technology and operational technology systems, detect malicious activity, and respond quickly and effectively. To encourage continued innovation in this area, government should lean towards open, performance-based standards that are technology neutral and vendor agnostic. And any new regulations should draw on existing guidelines, standards, and best practices. They should be harmonized with requirements in other sectors, particularly as between pipeline and electric sectors, for which there's often significant overlap. Finally, Congress needs to ensure that DHS has provided the resources necessary to effectively implement and monitor these mandates and continue its equally important voluntary work. Time is not on our side. The threat environment grows more dangerous with each passing day. We should not wait for a tragedy caused by malicious cyber activity in one of these vital sectors before we take necessary action. The proposed TSA directives reflect a growing body of evidence that the risk of serious disruptions to critical infrastructure is not potential or in the future. It is here now, and it requires an urgent response. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
We thank you for your testimony, Ms. Spalding. I now recognize Ms. Cogswell to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Clark, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Garbarino, and Ranking Member Jimenez, and the distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you this afternoon on transportation cybersecurity. The insights I will share today are informed by my 24 years of federal service, serving in varied capacities from the founding of DHS through my retirement as the Deputy Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration. My first significant engagement in countering cybersecurity threats to industrial control systems was while I served as the Special Assistant to the President for Transborder Security at the National Security Council after the 2012 cyber attack on Saudi Aramco. Since that time, I've seen the number of security threats increase, with an expanding number and type of threat actors, including both state and non-state actors, such as transnational criminal entities, an increased focus by them on exploiting network-connected ICS vulnerabilities, and an increasing level of risk faced across our transportation infrastructure for both the combination of increased threat, but also of consequence, as we see how an attack on one entity can affect the entire sector. I've also seen very strong partnerships across government and industry to develop tools, programs, information sharing mechanisms, and standards to mitigate the risk, including the NIST framework, TSA's pipeline security guidelines, and various multi-entity exercises. I am pleased to be able to be here today and hope that I can assist you as you consider how best Congress can support and enable transportation cyber security. I thank you for your willingness to call attention to this incredibly important topic, and I want to recognize the work that this committee, along with Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs and the Defense Armed Services Committee, are leading to promote and standardize cyber incident reporting. As this committee further examines roles, responsibilities, and activities, I'd highlight the following. First is the value of TSA's authority to issue security directives. Security directives have repeatedly demonstrated their value, providing a mechanism for TSA and industry to put immediate protective mitigation measures in place. And they send a clear message to our adversaries, to the American people, and to our allies. After the recent pipeline ransomware event, TSA's security directives were the tool of choice. SDs are most effective, as you have noted, when TSA and the regulated industry are able to work together throughout the entire process, from development of requirement through implementation. Second, promote bidirectional partnership through analysis of reporting data. As I've spoken with industry and government about the new cyber requirements, several colleagues expressed their interest in using this reporting to promote a deeper understanding of and engagement around cyber threats to critical infrastructure. There's a recognition that analyzing the threats and vulnerabilities associated with industrial control systems can tell us more about the prevalence and use of tactics, the effectiveness of measures to counter those tactics, and best practices to follow. Continued investment in open standards development. NIST and DHS, through CISA and TSA, have established cybersecurity and standards environments for ICS and critical infrastructure. continued evolution that provides transportation owners and operators with an opportunity to participate in that development, and a mechanism to communicate direction to solutions developers and providers should be encouraged. And finally, incentivizing and encouraging innovative approaches while requiring transportation operators to achieve minimum standards. As DHS looks to advance regulatory requirements for transportation operators, I anticipate it will look to adopt a set of baseline requirements based on current best practices and recommendations, with the aim of continuing to update them over time. DHS and Congress should consider innovative mechanisms for how to achieve these goals, using a model that emphasizes performance-based outcomes and allows industry to use alternative methods to reach compliance. This can be further encouraged through a regulatory model where transportation operators can use a qualified third party to complete the cybersecurity architecture reviews or planning required, similar to TSA's third-party K9 program, and providing operators with access to a list of qualified entities who can provide such functions and services, such as GSA does for identity management and credentials, or providing other recognized criteria. Cybersecurity, it is often said, is a team sport. Having many players on the field with standards-based interoperable solutions will enable innovation and enhance the protection of our critical infrastructure. As you consider statutory language, I would encourage you to develop it in a way that will create an enduring framework that supports the evolution of cybersecurity as the threats and risks continue to change. The technology-neutral approach based on open standards that promote competition, innovation, and interoperability should be the core of such effort. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cogswell, for your testimony. Members should know that votes have been called, but we will continue to receive testimony from our final two witnesses today. And so I now recognize Mr. Troy to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, Chairwoman and ranking members and members of the committee. Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Troy. I'm president of the Aviation Information Sharing and Analysis Center. The Aviation ISAC is a global nonprofit. Our members are on 5 continents and include airframers, airlines, airports, air navigation service providers, and more. Our mission is to make the aviation industry more resilient to cyber attacks. Last time I came before you was in September of 2018, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you once again about the cyber risk landscape in aviation. The cyber risks to the aviation industry have increased. Together, both private industry and the public sector have significantly increased cooperation in threat intelligence and best practices sharing. And now's the time for industry and government to partner even more closely in creating and enhancing effective cyber risk reduction frameworks. Over the past several years, ransomware has become a common term in aviation and many other sectors. The success of ransomware operators to extort money from their victims has greatly increased the level of skill and the number of persons willing to conduct ransomware attacks. The second stage ransomware events, wherein additional ransoms are sought in exchange for deletion of sensitive records stolen as a part of the ransom operation, also highlights the risk, the theft of intellectual property, sensitive business information, and privacy data. Ransomware can also shut down operations. This has the potential to be very impactful to the aviation industry. Ransomware, excuse me, and it also becomes more complicated in the aviation industry because many of the operational technologies are mobile. The attack on Colonial Pipeline, which has been spoken of today, and the QNX real-time operating system vulnerability are 2 examples of where a cyber attack or a vulnerability in product can have a ripple effect across many sectors. Preventing, responding to, and limiting the impact of these attacks requires a team of teams approach. Our core values include creating and maintaining partnerships with numerous government and private sector entities. The Aviation ISAC is proud to have partnered with the Aviation Cyber Initiative, a joint partnership led by DoD, FAA, and the DHS, which is in the process of transferring this tri-chair seat to the TSA. This year, the Aviation ISAC and the ACI significantly solidified our partnership by co-hosting a summit on aviation cybersecurity. We're also proud to partner with CISA, CISA is maturing well and has been put out timely, relevant guidance in direct response to recent cyber attacks on critical infrastructure and the supply chain. On 6 occasions, our intelligence was used in CISA's intelligence bulletins and intelligence information reports. Similarly, we've reached out to the TSA as they build their cybersecurity strategy and create a regulatory framework over cyber events in aviation. Our industry is also benefiting from a significant increase in cooperation between private entities. This includes the Aerospace Village, the Aerospace Industries Association, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, along with Airlines for America. The Aviation ISAC is also working with ICAO, the United Nations group, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and working with them on their aviation cybersecurity strategy and their cybersecurity action plan. We're also working several other initiatives to include secure interoperability strategies across the globe. As the U.S. considers legislation such as mandatory cyber reporting, the Aviation ISAC has been reaching out to educate stakeholders to ensure that the regulatory requirements are risk-based, achievable, cost-effective, and do not degrade the success the private sector has had in reducing cyber risk through ISACs like ours. With respect to the mandatory reporting requirements, we believe it's important that the mandatory reporting is scoped to well-defined and confirmed cyber incidents, that mandatory reporting requirements should include robust liability protections, and it's critical that Congress streamlines the federal and state reporting requirements to ensure that industry resources are used efficiently to combat malicious cyber threats, rather than customizing reports on the same incident for multiple agencies. I also believe the reporting program should encourage cooperation and strengthen trust between the public and private sectors, which would include bidirectional information sharing. Information reported to the government needs to be properly aggregated, anonymized, analyzed, and shared with industry to help prevent future incidents. Thank you again for the opportunity to come before you today and work on this important matter of cybersecurity in aviation.
Thank you, Mr. Troy, for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Dickerson, to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwomen, ranking members, and members of the subcommittees. My name is Scott Dickerson, and I serve as the Executive Director of the nonprofit Maritime Transportation System Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the MTS ISAC. And a decade ago, helped create the Coast Guard Cyber Command before serving in other civilian roles and supporting private sector cybersecurity programs. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittees today. The MTS ISAC is made up of public and private sector stakeholders, including port authorities, vessel and terminal owners and operators, cruise lines, energy facilities, ferry operators, and other members of the maritime community. We focus on actionable, relevant, and timely cyber threat information sharing. We have supported cybersecurity guidelines on board vessels, as well as cybersecurity guidelines for ports and port facilities, both of which are recognized by the UN's International Maritime Organization. Our efforts have resulted in significantly more cybersecurity advisories being distributed to our maritime community than those released by the 20+ federal government organizations with a responsibility for maritime security combined. A key reason for the level of sharing we see is the anonymization of identities and the trust that this reinforces with the maritime community. Others may tell you we need billions of dollars in cybersecurity investment across the critical infrastructure sectors. We do need investment.